When the most feared man in the Appalachian frontier walked into that smoke-filled saloon and announced he was taking a wife, every soul in Black Hollow held their breath. But what happened next? When he passed over every beautiful woman in that room and chose her, the one they'd all mocked for years, that single moment would shake this frontier town to its core and set in motion a chain of events that nobody could have predicted. If you want to see how the woman everyone called worthless became a legend whispered about across 3 territories, stay until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The winter of 1823 hit the Appalachian frontier like a fist wrapped in iron. Black Hollow wasn't much, a collection of rough timber buildings clinging to the edge of civilization, where the wilderness pressed in so close you could smell the pine resin mixing with wood smoke every time the wind shifted. The kind of place where people came to disappear, or to reinvent themselves, or because they'd worn out their welcome everywhere else. The Red Mare Saloon sat at the heart of town, if you could call it that. 2 stories of weathered planks that groaned in the wind, windows so grimy you couldn't see through them even in daylight, and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on. Tobacco smoke, unwashed bodies, spilled whiskey, and the sour, sweet stench of desperation that seemed to seep from the very walls. Saturday night meant the place was packed shoulder to shoulder. Trappers, traders, drifters, a handful of men who'd come west after the war and never quite figured out how to live with themselves again. Women too, though not many. A few working girls with hard eyes and harder smiles. The mayor's wife and her daughter, dressed in their Sunday best even though it was Saturday, sitting stiff-backed at a corner table like they were doing everyone a favor just by breathing the same air, and Clara Bellamy. She sat alone near the back, in the shadows where the lamplight didn't quite reach. 32 years old, heavy-set in a way that made the other women whisper behind their hands, wearing a dress that had been patched so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. Her hair was pulled back in a bun that had started to come loose hours ago, and her hands, rough, work-scarred hands, gripped a cup of weak tea that had long since gone cold. Clara had learned a long time ago that if you made yourself small enough, quiet enough, sometimes people forgot you were there. And that was better. Better than the alternative. "You hear about Mary Peterson?" A woman's voice carried from the next table. Clara didn't look up, but she heard every word. "Pregnant again. 4th one. You'd think her husband would have the decency to... Well, at least someone wants her," another voice cut in. Then lower, but not low enough. "Unlike some people." Laughter, sharp as broken glass. Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. She'd heard worse. She'd heard worse nearly every day for the past 15 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation as the fat girl nobody wanted. She'd worked every job available to a woman in Black Hollow, taking in washing, mending clothes, cleaning houses, tending the sick when nobody else would do it. She'd saved every penny, kept her head down, tried to be invisible. It never quite worked. "I heard Thomas Garrett's looking for a wife," someone said. "Widower with 3 kids. Desperate enough he might take anybody." "Anybody except Clara Bellamy." More laughter. "Man's got standards, even if they're low." Clara's face burned, but she didn't move. Didn't look up. Just sat there in the shadows, holding her cold tea, wondering, not for the first time, what it would be like to simply disappear. To walk out into that frozen wilderness and keep walking until there was no one left to mock her, no one left to remind her that she was worth less than nothing in the eyes of this town. The saloon door crashed open. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees as snow and wind howled in. Every head turned. The piano player's hands froze on the keys mid-chord. Gideon Rourke filled the doorway like a piece of the mountain itself had decided to walk among men. He was massive, not tall exactly, maybe 5'11" or 6 feet, but built like he'd been carved from oak and left to weather in the elements for 40 years. Shoulders broad enough to block out the lamplight, arms thick as fence posts, a beard that covered half his face, more gray than black now, and eyes that looked like they'd seen things most people couldn't imagine and had stopped being impressed by any of it. He wore buckskin that had been worked soft by years of use, a fur coat that made him look even bigger, and he carried the kind of stillness that predators have, the kind that makes prey animals freeze and pray they haven't been noticed. Gideon Rourke was a legend in these parts, though not the kind people celebrated to his face. Mountain man. Trapper. Guide for expeditions that needed someone who knew how to survive where the maps stopped making sense. Rumors followed him like smoke, that he'd lived with natives for years, that he'd killed 3 men in a single fight using nothing but a skinning knife, that he knew routes through the mountains that nobody else had ever found. People respected him. People feared him. Nobody particularly liked him because Gideon Rourke didn't seem to give a damn whether anyone liked him or not. He stepped inside, shaking snow off his coat. Behind him, 2 other mountain men followed, younger, leaner, but with that same hardness in their eyes. The door swung shut, and the warmth of the saloon slowly crept back in. "Rourke," the bartender said, trying to sound casual and not quite managing it, "didn't expect you down from the high country this time of year." Gideon walked to the bar without answering. His boots hit the floorboards with the weight of judgment. "Whiskey," he said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Leave the bottle." The bartender obliged fast. Gideon drank the first shot in silence, then poured another. The saloon had gone quiet, in that way places do when everyone's pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. One of the younger mountain men, a wiry fellow named Cole, who couldn't have been more than 25, sidled up next to Gideon and grinned. "Hell of a crowd tonight," Cole said. "Maybe we should have stayed in the mountains, boss." Gideon didn't answer. He drank his second shot, then turned around and leaned back against the bar, surveying the room with those cold, measuring eyes. "I got business to attend to," he said. The way he said it made the silence deeper. People exchanged glances. The mayor's wife clutched her daughter's arm like she expected violence to break out. Gideon cleared his throat. "I'm 46 years old," he announced to the room. "I've lived rough, done things I ain't proud of, but I'm done living alone." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "I got a valley up in the high country," Gideon continued. "Good land, water year-round, protected from the worst of the weather. I've been working it for 3 years now, and it's time I had a wife to share it with." The murmur became whispers. The working girl sat up straighter. The mayor's daughter blushed and looked down at her hands. Cole laughed nervously. "Boss, you're serious? You're actually gonna—" "Dead serious," Gideon said. He set his glass down on the bar with a solid thunk. "I ain't asking for much. A woman who can work, who won't complain about hard living, who understands that the frontier don't care about fancy dresses or tea parties." One of the working girls, a redhead named Susan, who'd been in Black Hollow longer than most, stood up, smoothing her dress. "Well, Mr. Rourke, I think—" But Gideon was already moving. He walked across the saloon floor with that same deliberate weight, his eyes fixed on something in the shadows at the back of the room. People turned in their chairs to follow his gaze, confusion shifting to shock as they realized where he was headed. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't possibly. Gideon Rourke stopped in front of Clara Bellamy's table. She looked up slowly, her face pale in the lamplight, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from too many cruel jokes, too many false hopes crushed under the weight of laughter. "Miss Bellamy," Gideon said. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Around them, the entire saloon held its breath. "I know who you are," Gideon continued. His voice was quieter now, but it carried anyway. "You tended my partner Jacob when he got the fever 2 winters back. He was staying at the boarding house, delirious. Nobody wanted to go near him. But you did. You sat with him for 3 days straight, changed his bandages, made sure he drank water, probably saved his life." Clara blinked. She remembered vaguely a sick man, a stranger who'd needed help. She'd done what anyone would do, what anyone should do, though, of course, nobody else had. "I'm building something up in that valley," Gideon said. "Something that'll last. I need a wife who's got strength where it counts. Not in her looks or her family name, but here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "I need someone who won't break when things get hard. And I figure you're that woman." The silence in the saloon was absolute now. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to have stopped crackling. Clara's hands trembled. This had to be a joke, another cruel joke. Any second now someone would laugh, and the whole room would join in, and she'd be the fool again. "I ain't much for pretty words," Gideon said, "and I ain't offering an easy life, but I'm offering an honest one, if you'll have me." He held out his hand. Clara stared at it, at the scars on his knuckles, at the calluses that spoke of decades of hard work, at the simple, impossible fact that this man, this legendary, feared mountain man, was standing in front of her, in front of the entire town, asking her to be his wife. She can't, the mayor's wife started to say. This is ridiculous, someone else muttered. He's lost his mind. Clara Bellamy? A woman laughed. He's choosing Clara Bellamy? The laughter started then. Not from everyone, but from enough. The same people who'd mocked her for years, who'd made her feel like she was nothing, were laughing again. Because even now, even in this impossible moment, they couldn't imagine that someone might actually want her. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She started to stand, to run, to escape this fresh humiliation. Gideon's hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, but firm. Don't, he said quietly. Don't let them make you run. She looked up at him, and for the first time she really saw his eyes. There was no mockery there, no pity either, just a kind of steady recognition, like he was looking at a fellow traveler on a hard road and offering to walk the next stretch together. I meant what I said, Gideon told her. Every word. Clara's throat closed up. She couldn't speak, couldn't think. The whole world had narrowed down to this moment, this man, this impossible choice. Behind Gideon, she could see the faces of everyone in Black Hollow. The people who'd ignored her, dismissed her, made her feel invisible for years. She could see the shock on their faces, the disbelief, the contempt. She thought about all the nights she'd gone home to her tiny rented room and cried herself to sleep. All the times she'd wondered if there was something fundamentally wrong with her, something broken and unfixable. All the years of being told, directly and indirectly, that she wasn't worth loving. Gideon Rourke was offering her a way out. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe this was still a joke, some elaborate humiliation she didn't understand yet. But looking into his eyes, she didn't think so. Yes, she whispered. Gideon nodded once, like she'd just confirmed something he already knew. Then he took off his heavy fur coat, the one that probably cost more than everything Clara owned combined, and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it settled around her like armor. Let's go, he said. Clara stood. Her legs shook, but she stood. And when Gideon offered his arm, she took it. They walked toward the door together. Every eye in the saloon tracked them. The laughter had died, replaced by stunned silence. Cole and the other mountain man fell in behind them, grinning like they were in on the best joke nobody else understood. You can't be serious, the mayor's wife called out. That woman she's... Gideon stopped at the door and looked back. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes made the mayor's wife close her mouth fast. That woman, Gideon said slowly, has more worth in her little finger than this entire room combined, and I'd suggest you remember that. He opened the door. Snow and wind rushed in again, wild and free. Come on, Clara, he said, gentler now. Let's go home. They stepped out into the frozen night, leaving Black Hollow and its cruel laughter behind. The journey up into the mountains should have killed them. That's what Clara thought later, looking back on those first brutal days. She'd never been more than a few miles outside of Black Hollow in her entire life, and suddenly she was following Gideon Rourke up narrow trails that clung to cliff faces, through forests so thick the daylight barely penetrated, across frozen streams where one wrong step meant plunging into water cold enough to stop your heart. Gideon set a pace that would have been hard for an experienced traveler. For Clara, it was agony. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed. The fur coat that had felt like protection in the saloon now felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Snow got into her boots and melted, soaking her feet until they went numb. The cold bit through every layer of clothing she owned, but she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, didn't give Gideon any reason to regret choosing her, because part of her still couldn't believe this was real. Any moment she expected to wake up in her rented room, to realize it had all been a dream, or worse, to have Gideon turn around and say he'd made a mistake, that this was all a test, that she'd failed. So she kept walking. Cole and the other mountain man, whose name was Joseph, she learned, ranged ahead and behind, moving through the wilderness like they were part of it. They hunted while they traveled, bringing down a deer on the second day, rabbits, and a turkey on the third. They made camp each night with practiced efficiency, building fires that threw heat without throwing light, setting up shelter that kept the worst of the weather off. Gideon barely spoke. He'd check on her periodically. You holding up? Need water? Watch your step here. But mostly he just led the way, expecting her to follow. On the fourth night, Clara finally broke down. They'd made camp in a small cave, barely more than an overhang really, but it blocked the wind and reflected the fire's heat. Cole and Joseph had gone to check their snares. Gideon was tending the fire, adding wood piece by piece, when he heard Clara crying. She'd tried to muffle it, pressing her face into her rolled-up blanket, but the sobs still escaped. All the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty she'd been holding back for days came pouring out. Gideon sat still for a moment, then moved to sit beside her, not touching, just present. "You regretting it already?" he asked. Clara shook her head violently. No, I just—" She couldn't find words. How could she explain that she was crying from relief as much as fear? That for the first time in years someone had looked at her and seen something worth having? That she was terrified of disappointing him, of proving everyone in Black Hollow right? "I don't know how to be a wife," she finally managed. "I don't know how to survive in the wilderness. I don't know why you chose me." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You know why Jacob survived that fever?" Clara wiped her eyes. "The medicine? Medicine helped. But it wasn't the medicine that saved him. It was the fact that you didn't give up on him. When everyone else wrote him off as already dead, you sat with him. You fought for him. That takes a kind of strength most people don't have." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up into the darkness. "I've seen men twice your size break down and quit when things got hard," he continued. "I've seen people with every advantage in the world crumble the first time they faced real adversity. But you? You've been facing adversity your whole life. You've been fighting a battle every single day just to keep your dignity, to keep going when everyone around you was telling you that you weren't worth the effort." He looked at her then, and his eyes reflected the firelight. "That's what I need in a wife," he said simply. "Not someone who's had everything handed to them. Not someone who'll fall apart the first winter we have a bad harvest or a long sickness. I need someone who knows how to endure, how to fight, how to hold on when letting go would be easier." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I chose you," Gideon said, "because you're a survivor. And out here, that matters more than anything else." He stood up, brushing snow off his pants. "We'll reach the valley tomorrow. It ain't much yet, just a cabin and some cleared land. But it's ours, and we're going to build something there that'll last." That night, Clara slept better than she had in years. Rourke's Crossing, though it didn't have that name yet, sat in a high mountain valley that felt like it had been hidden from the world on purpose. The mountains rose on three sides like walls, their peaks white with snow even in summer. A river ran through the middle of the valley, fed by snowmelt from the heights, so cold and clear you could see every stone on the bottom. Pine forests covered the slopes, and in the valley itself, there were meadows where the grass grew thick and wild. Gideon's cabin stood at the north end of the valley, backed up against the tree line. It was rough, logs chinked with mud and moss, a roof of split shingles that probably leaked in heavy rain, windows covered with oiled paper instead of glass. One room, dirt floor. A stone fireplace that someone had built with more determination than skill. To Clara, it looked like a palace. "It ain't much," Gideon said, watching her face, "but it's weather tight, and I've been clearing land for planting come spring." Clara walked inside slowly. There was a bed frame in one corner, just poles lashed together, but with a real mattress stuffed with pine needles and moss. A table, 2 chairs, shelves on the wall holding supplies, flour, salt, ammunition, tools. A few steel traps hung from pegs. A rifle stood in the corner, evidence of a solitary life lived hard. "I'll build a better place," Gideon said from the doorway. "This was just meant to get through the winters while I worked the land. But with 2 of us, we can—" "It's perfect," Clara interrupted. She ran her hand along the rough wood of the table. "It's perfect." Gideon looked relieved, though he tried to hide it. Cole and Joseph stayed for 3 more days, helping Gideon show Clara the basics of mountain living, where the good water sources were, which plants you could eat and which would kill you, how to tell if an animal was nearby by reading tracks in the snow, how to use a rifle, which Clara was terrible at initially, but got slightly less terrible with practice. On the morning they left, Cole pulled Clara aside. "Boss ain't the easiest man to live with," he said bluntly. "He's used to being alone, used to doing things his way. He don't talk much, and when he does, he don't waste words." Clara nodded, unsure where this was going. "But he's the most honest man I ever met," Cole continued. "He'll never lie to you, never pretend to be something he ain't. And if he says he'll do something, consider it done." He grinned. "Also, he can't cook worth a damn, so if you got any skill in that area, you'll be doing yourself a favor." Joseph laughed. "What Cole's trying to say is, Gideon's a good man, rough around the edges but solid all the way through. You could do a lot worse." "I know," Clara said softly. They left at dawn, heading back toward their own trap lines and camps. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching them disappear into the forest, and felt the first real stab of loneliness since they'd left Black Hollow. Then Gideon came up behind her, carrying an armful of firewood. "We got work to do before winter settles in proper," he said. "You ready?" Clara took a deep breath of the cold, clean mountain air. "I'm ready." The first weeks were brutal. Clara had thought she knew what hard work meant. She'd spent years washing other people's clothes, scrubbing floors, hauling water. But frontier living was something else entirely. Every task took twice as long and 3 times as much effort as it would have in town. Fetching water meant breaking through ice on the river and carrying heavy buckets up a slope. Cooking meant keeping the fire going constantly, which meant cutting wood constantly, which meant her hands blistered and bled until they finally formed calluses. Washing clothes in freezing water left her hands so numb she couldn't feel her fingers for hours afterward. And the cold, the relentless, bone-deep cold that no amount of layers could completely shut out. But Clara worked. She worked until her muscles screamed and her vision blurred with exhaustion. She learned to do things she'd never imagined, gutting fish, skinning rabbits, rendering fat for soap and candles. Gideon taught her without condescension, showing her once or twice, and then expecting her to figure it out. "You're doing good," he'd say occasionally, high praise from him. They fell into a rhythm. Gideon would head out before dawn to check his trap lines or hunt, and Clara would handle the homestead, tending the fire, preparing food, doing the endless maintenance that kept them alive. When Gideon returned, they'd work together on bigger projects, reinforcing the cabin walls, building a proper smokehouse, constructing a root cellar that would keep food from freezing solid in the deep winter. They didn't talk much. Gideon wasn't built for conversation, and Clara was still learning how to exist in this new life. But the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people working toward the same goal, side by side. At night, they'd sit by the fire. Gideon would clean his rifle or repair traps while Clara mended clothes or worked on a pair of fur mittens she was making. Sometimes Gideon would tell stories, not about himself exactly, but about the land. About the time he saw a grizzly take down an elk. About the winter he got caught in a blizzard and had to dig a snow cave to survive. About the native tribes who'd lived in these mountains for generations and knew secrets about the land that no white man would ever learn. Clara listened to every word, absorbing knowledge that might keep her alive someday. A month passed. Then 2. They'd been married in name only. Gideon slept in the bed, Clara on a pallet near the fire. He never pushed, never suggested anything different. At first, Clara was relieved. Then, as time went on, she started to wonder if he regretted his choice, if he'd wanted a wife in theory but found the reality less appealing. One night, she asked him. They were sitting by the fire, the wind howling outside loud enough to make the cabin walls shudder. Gideon was sharpening his knife with long, methodical strokes. "Do you regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Marrying me?" Gideon's hand stopped mid-stroke. He looked up, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "No," he said. "Why would you think that?" Clara's face heated. We haven't—" She couldn't find the words. Understanding dawned in Gideon's eyes. He set down the knife and whetstone. "Clara," he said carefully, "I meant what I said in that saloon. I wanted a wife, a partner, someone to build this life with. But I ain't gonna force anything. When you're ready, if you're ready, I'll be here. Until then, nothing changes." He picked up the knife again and resumed sharpening. "You ain't a possession," he added, almost as an afterthought. "You're a person with your own mind and your own choices. I respect that." Clara felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't even realized was tight. "Thank you," she whispered. Gideon just nodded. Winter deepened. The snow piled up until it was taller than Clara in some places. The river froze solid. Some days the wind was so fierce they couldn't leave the cabin at all, could only huddle by the fire and wait for it to pass. But they survived. And somewhere in the midst of all that survival, something shifted between them. Clara couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the morning she woke up to find Gideon had already started the fire and left a pot of weak coffee warming by the coals. A small kindness when every movement took effort. Maybe it was the afternoon she spent 3 hours trying to tan a deer hide, using instructions he'd given her. And when he came home and saw her frustrated tears, he sat down beside her and patiently walked her through it again, his big scarred hands gentle. Maybe it was the night a tree fell near the cabin during a storm, and they both jolted awake, and in the darkness Gideon's hand had found hers and held on until the danger passed. Small moments, quiet moments, the kind of intimacy that grows not from passion, but from proximity and shared struggle. One night in late February, Clara didn't go to her pallet by the fire. Gideon was already in bed, and he looked up in surprise when she approached. "Can I?" Clara started, then stopped, her courage faltering. Gideon's expression softened. He pulled back the furs that served as blankets. "Come on," he said simply. Clara slipped in beside him, her heart pounding. But Gideon just put his arm around her shoulders, tucked her against his side, and closed his eyes. "Warmer this way," he murmured. "Waste of heat, keeping 2 fires going." Clara smiled in the darkness. "Practical. Always." She felt his chest move with quiet laughter. They fell asleep like that. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the wilderness, holding on while the winter raged outside. Tick. Spring came late to the high country, but when it finally arrived, it was like the whole world woke up at once. The river ice broke with sounds like thunder. The snow melted into rushing streams that carved new paths down the mountainsides. The meadows emerged from their white blanket, brown and matted at first, then suddenly green. Birds returned. First the ravens and jays, then songbirds Clara didn't have names for. The trees budded. Flowers pushed up through the wet earth. And Clara, standing in the cabin doorway one morning, realized she'd survived her first frontier winter. "You made it," Gideon said, coming up behind her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. Clara took it, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "We made it." Gideon smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. "Yeah, we did." They stood there in silence, drinking their coffee, watching the valley come back to life. "I want to plant a garden," Clara said suddenly. "A real one. Not just practical crops, but flowers, too. Things that are just beautiful." Gideon considered this. Flowers won't feed us. No, but they'll remind us that we're not just surviving, we're living. Another long pause, then, "All right, we'll clear a plot near the cabin. You can plant whatever you want." Clara looked up at him, surprised and pleased. "Really?" "Really." He finished his coffee and set the cup down. "But first, we got about 3 months of work to do before planting season's over. Hope you're ready." Clara laughed. "I'm ready." They worked through the spring like people possessed, clearing land, breaking ground, building fences to keep deer and elk out of what would become their fields. Gideon had saved seeds from the previous year, corn, beans, squash, potatoes. They planted in long rows, Clara's back screaming by the end of each day. But in the evenings, she had her flower garden, a small plot near the cabin door where she planted wildflower seeds she'd gathered from the meadows. Gideon helped her build a little fence around it, more to mark it as special than for any practical purpose. "It's silly," Clara said, patting down the soil over the seeds. "Wasting effort on something that won't help us survive." "It ain't silly," Gideon said. He was sitting on the cabin steps, cleaning mud off his boots. "Man can't live on just bread and water. Sometimes you need something that's just for joy." Clara looked at him, this hard man who'd lived alone in the mountains for years, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "When did you get so wise?" she teased. "I ain't wise, just old." "You're not that old. 46 feels pretty damn old when you're planting crops." Clara laughed and threw a handful of dirt at him. He dodged, grinning, and the moment was so normal, so domestic, that Clara had to blink back sudden tears. This was her life now, this valley, this cabin, this man, and against all odds, she was happy. Summer came, and with it, visitors. The first was a trapper named William, who was heading west and needed to resupply. Gideon traded him jerky and flour for ammunition and information about the mountain passes. William stayed one night, and over dinner he stared at Clara with undisguised curiosity. "I heard Gideon Rourke got himself a wife," William said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't quite believe it until now." "Believe it?" Gideon said flatly. "She from back east?" "Black Hollow." William's eyes widened. "Black Hollow? That rough-ass town at the edge of—" "That's the one," Clara interrupted smoothly. "I was ready for a change of scenery." "Well," William looked between them, clearly trying to piece together the story. "You've certainly found that." After William left, more came. A family heading north to claim land near the Canadian border, desperate for fresh water and a safe place to rest. A missionary traveling alone, asking if there were any souls in need of saving. A pair of trappers who'd heard about Gideon's Valley and wanted to see if the rumors were true. Word was spreading. The valley wasn't so secret anymore. "We could turn them away," Gideon said one night after a particularly exhausting visit. "Tell them to find their own place." But Clara shook her head. "They're just people trying to survive, same as us. And we have room. We have resources. If we keep helping every traveler that comes through, we'll run ourselves dry. Then we'll plan better, grow more, build bigger stores." Clara set down the plate she was washing and turned to face him. "Gideon, when you found me in that saloon, I was one of those desperate people. Nobody wanted to help me. Nobody thought I was worth the effort. But you did." Gideon was quiet, his jaw working. "I can't turn away people who need help," Clara continued. "Not when I remember what it felt like to be on the other side." Finally, Gideon nodded. "All right, but we do it smart. We don't give away more than we can afford. And if anyone causes trouble, they're gone. Agreed?" "Agreed." That summer, they built a second cabin, smaller than the first, but sturdy. A place for visitors to stay instead of crowding into their home. Gideon grumbled about the work, but Clara caught him putting extra care into the construction, making sure the roof was tight and the floor was level. In August, a woman arrived with 3 children and no husband. Her name was Margaret. She was maybe 30, thin as a rail, with eyes that had seen too much. Her children ranged from 8 to 3, and they all had that hollow look that comes from hunger. "My husband died of cholera in Independence," Margaret said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "I was heading to my brother's place in Oregon, but our wagon broke down in the foothills. I've been walking for 2 weeks. I just need somewhere to rest, just for a few days. Please?" Claire's heart broke looking at those children. "You can stay as long as you need," she said immediately. Gideon gave her a look but didn't contradict her. Margaret and her children stayed in the visitor cabin. Clara brought them food, soup made with vegetables from their garden, fresh bread, milk from the cow Gideon had traded for that spring. She gave them clothes that she'd mended, blankets that would keep them warm. The children slowly came back to life. Color returned to their cheeks. The youngest one, a little girl named Sarah, started to smile again. After a week, Margaret came to Clara while she was working in the garden. "I don't know how to thank you," Margaret said. "You've been so kind, and we're strangers. You don't owe us anything." Clara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're at their lowest." "I can work," Margaret said quickly. "I can help with the cooking, the washing, whatever you need. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden, but if you want to help, I won't say no." Margaret proved to be a hard worker. She took over most of the cooking, freeing up Clara to work on other projects. She taught Clara how to make proper bread, not the dense, heavy loaves Clara had been producing, but light, fluffy bread that melted in your mouth. She knew herb lore that Clara didn't, could identify plants that were good for medicine. The children helped too, in their way. The oldest boy, Thomas, started helping Gideon with the heavier work. The middle child, Rebecca, would follow Clara around the garden, asking questions about everything. 2 weeks became 3, then a month. One evening, Gideon pulled Clara aside. "They're still here," he said. "I know. How long are we keeping them?" Clara bit her lip. "I don't know. Margaret's brother is in Oregon Territory. That's months of travel, even if she had a wagon. She can't make that journey with 3 children, not before winter. She'd never survive." Gideon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So what are you suggesting?" "Let them stay the winter. Come spring, we'll help her get proper supplies. Maybe find a wagon train heading west. But for now," Clara looked at him pleadingly. "For now, let them stay, please." Gideon looked over at the visitor cabin, where lamplight glowed warm in the windows, and he could hear the faint sound of Margaret singing her children to sleep. "All right," he said finally. "But come spring, they move on. We can't keep collecting strays, Clara. This valley can only support so many." "I know, thank you." But come spring, Margaret was still there, and she wasn't alone. 18. Winter arrived early that year, and with it came more than just snow. A man stumbled into their valley in late October, half frozen, delirious with fever. Gideon found him collapsed near the tree line and carried him back to the cabin. Clara took one look at the festering wound on his leg and knew they were in trouble. "That's infected bad," she said, already boiling water. "He needs medicine we don't have." "He needs a doctor," Gideon corrected grimly. "But the nearest one is 3 days' ride, and he won't last that long." Clara worked through the night, using every bit of knowledge she'd gathered from tending the sick in Black Hollow. She cleaned the wound with whiskey that made the man scream even in his delirium. She packed it with a poultice made from herbs Margaret had shown her. She kept him hydrated, kept him warm, kept vigil by his bedside while Gideon paced and Margaret kept the children quiet in the other cabin. 3 days later, the fever broke. The man's name was Samuel. He was a courier carrying messages between frontier settlements, and he'd been attacked by a bear 2 weeks ago. He'd tried to keep going, but the infection had nearly killed him. "You saved my life," he told Clara when he was finally lucid enough to speak. "I won't forget that." "Just rest," Clara said. "You're still weak." Samuel stayed for 3 weeks, recovering. And when he finally left, he spread the word about Rourke's Crossing, about the valley in the mountains where a woman named Clara Bellamy would tend to the sick, where travelers could find shelter and safety, where outcasts and broken people could find a second chance. The word spread like wildfire. By December, there were 12 people living in the valley. By January, 20. Some were travelers who'd intended to stay a night and ended up staying a month. Others were families who'd heard about the settlement and came looking for a place to make a new start. Gideon built more cabins. Rough ones at first, just good enough to keep the cold out. But people helped. The men who'd come seeking shelter pitched in with the construction. Women helped Clara with the cooking and the endless work of keeping everyone fed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't organized. It just happened. Clara found herself at the center of it all, often without meaning to. People came to her with questions, with problems, with disputes that needed settling. She'd never asked for authority, but somehow she'd become the heart of this growing community. One night in February, she sat by the fire in their cabin, their original cabin, now surrounded by a dozen others, and started to cry. Gideon looked up from the harness he was repairing. "What's wrong?" "I don't know what I'm doing," Clara said. "All these people, they're looking to me for answers, and I don't have any. I'm just Clara Bellamy, the woman everyone mocked. What do I know about leading a community?" Gideon set down the harness and moved to sit beside her. "You know how to care," he said simply. "You know how to see people when they're hurting and help them. That's more than most leaders have. But what if I make mistakes? What if people get hurt because I gave them bad advice? Then you'll learn and do better next time. That's all anyone can do." He put his arm around her shoulders. "You're doing good, Clara. Better than I could do. This settlement, this community we're building, it's happening because of you." "We're building it," Clara corrected, "both of us. I'm just putting up walls and keeping folks from freezing. You're giving them hope. There's a difference." Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. Outside, snow fell soft and constant. Inside their cabin, the fire burned warm. And in the valley around them, a community was taking root, fragile and uncertain, but growing stronger with each passing day. Neither of them knew it yet, but the real test was still to come. The fever that would nearly destroy everything was just weeks away. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early March, when Thomas burst into Clara's cabin without knocking. "Miss Clara!" The boy was 12 now, taller than he'd been when his mother brought him to the valley, but his face was white with fear. "It's the Henderson baby. Something's wrong." Clara was on her feet instantly, grabbing her medicine bag, a leather satchel she'd assembled over the winter, filled with herbs, bandages, and the few real medicines they had. "What kind of wrong?" "He's burning up, won't stop crying. Mrs. Henderson is scared." Clara's stomach dropped. The Hendersons had arrived 2 weeks ago. a young couple with an infant barely 6 months old. They'd been heading to California but got turned around in the mountains. Standard story, like half the people in the valley. She followed Thomas through the settlement, because that's what it was now, a proper settlement. 16 cabins clustered around the meadow where Clara's garden had been. Smoke rising from every chimney, children playing in the snow. A community. The Henderson cabin was one of the newer ones, still smelling of fresh-cut pine. Inside, Sarah Henderson sat on the edge of the bed, rocking her baby with tears streaming down her face. The infant's cries were weak, thready, not the healthy wail of a fussy child. "He won't eat," Sarah said immediately, "and he's so hot. I tried to cool him down with water, but it's not helping." Clara took the baby gently. The child was indeed burning with fever, his small face flushed and his breathing rapid. She felt his belly, distended and hard, checked his mouth, dry despite the drool. "When did this start?" "Last night. I thought it was just teething, but then this morning he got worse." Clara examined the baby carefully while Sarah hovered, wringing her hands. The symptoms were familiar, too familiar. She'd seen this before in Black Hollow, years ago. "I need to check the other children," Clara said, keeping her voice calm even though her heart was racing. "Thomas, go find your mother. Tell her to check Rebecca and Sarah. Anyone who's had a fever, even a small one. Anyone who's feeling poorly at all." Thomas ran. Clara spent the next hour going cabin to cabin. What she found made her blood run cold. The Miller family. Both children feverish. Old Joseph Grant, who'd shown up in January claiming to be 70, but probably closer to 60, complaining of chills and body aches. The Coopers' teenage daughter vomiting behind their cabin. And more. Too many more. By noon, she'd counted 14 people with symptoms. She found Gideon at the lumber site where he and 4 other men were cutting trees for another cabin. He saw her face and immediately set down his axe. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "Bad, and spreading fast." Clara's hands were shaking. "It's the same fever that swept through Black Hollow 5 years ago. Killed a dozen people before it burned itself out." Gideon's jaw tightened. "What do we need?" "Medicine we don't have. A doctor who's 3 days away, assuming the passes are clear, which they're not. And luck." She looked at the men working around them, strong, healthy men who might be sick by tomorrow. "We need to quarantine the sick ones. Keep it from spreading to everyone." "Too late for that," one of the men said. His name was Bill, a trapper who'd decided to winter in the valley. "We're all living on top of each other. If it's contagious, we've all been exposed." He was right. The cabins were close together. People shared meals, shared tools, shared everything. It was what made the community work. It was also what would kill them. "Then we prepare for the worst," Clara said. She turned to Gideon. "The big hall you were planning to build for gatherings, we need it now. As a hospital, somewhere we can keep the sick together, watch them, treat them." "That'll take weeks to build." "Then we use what we have, the storage shed. It's the biggest structure we've got besides individual cabins." Gideon nodded once. "I'll clear it out." Clara spent the rest of the day organizing. The storage shed became a hospital, rough cots lined up in rows, blankets hung between them for minimal privacy. Margaret took charge of keeping a fire going constantly, keeping water boiling. 2 other women, Helen and Catherine, both mothers who'd come to the valley seeking safety, volunteered to help nurse the sick. By evening, 22 people were showing symptoms. By midnight, it was 30. Clara moved through the makeshift hospital like a ghost, checking foreheads, spooning water into dry mouths, changing sweat-soaked sheets. Her medicine bag felt pitifully inadequate. Willow bark tea for the fever, peppermint for the nausea, compresses for the worst of the heat, folk remedies passed down from women who'd had nothing else to work with. "This isn't enough," Helen said quietly, meeting Clara at the water bucket. "We're losing them." "We're not losing anyone," Clara said sharply. Then softer. "We can't lose anyone." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The first death came on the 3rd day. Joseph Grant, the old man who'd claimed to be a preacher before admitting he was actually a failed shopkeeper running from debts. He'd been one of the first to fall sick, and his age worked against him. Clara had sat with him through the worst of it, but his heart simply gave out. They buried him on the hillside overlooking the valley, in ground that was still half frozen. Gideon and 3 other men spent 2 hours digging the grave. There was no preacher to say words over him, so Clara did her best. Joseph Grant came to this valley looking for a second chance, she said to the small group gathered in the snow. He found it. He worked hard. He helped build this place. And he died among friends. That's more than a lot of people get. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't proper. But it was honest. 2 days later, they buried the Henderson baby. Sarah Henderson screamed when her child stopped breathing. The sound echoed across the valley, sharp and terrible. Clara had been with them, had tried everything she knew, but the infant was too small, too weak. The fever took him. Sarah wouldn't let go of the body. Her husband had to physically pry their son from her arms. Clara watched with tears streaming down her face, feeling the weight of every failure, every person she couldn't save. "This is my fault," she told Gideon that night. They were in their cabin, one of the few places not filled with sick people. "I encouraged everyone to come here. I said we could help them, and now they're dying. You didn't make them sick. I didn't save them either." Gideon grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. You are doing everything that can be done. You're working yourself to death trying to save these people. If you give up now, if you fall apart, they've got nobody. You hear me? Nobody." Clara's vision blurred with exhaustion and grief. "I don't know if I can do this." "Yes, you can, because you're the strongest person I've ever met." His grip tightened, and because they need you. She wanted to collapse, wanted to give in to the despair that was clawing at her chest. But Gideon was right. These people had no one else. So she went back to work. The fever raged for 2 weeks. 14 days that felt like a year. Clara barely slept, barely ate. She moved from patient to patient in a fog of exhaustion, doing what she could with what she had. Margaret worked beside her, her own children miraculously untouched by the sickness. Helen and Catherine, too, though Catherine's husband fell ill and they had to bar her from his bedside to keep her from exhausting herself. Gideon turned into something harder during those weeks. He rode down to Black Hollow twice, begging for medical supplies, for a doctor, for any help at all. Both times he was turned away. "They said it's not their problem," he told Clara after the second trip, his voice flat with rage. "Said we chose to live in the wilderness. We can deal with the consequences." "Of course they did," Clara said bitterly. She was changing bandages on a young woman whose fever had caused her to develop sores. Why would they help the people they never wanted in the first place? The mayor's wife actually laughed, said maybe this was what we deserved for thinking we were better than them. Clara's hands stilled. The same people who'd mocked her in that saloon were now refusing to help sick children, dying babies, families who'd done nothing wrong except try to survive. "Then we do it ourselves," she said quietly, "like we always have." The turning point came on day 16. Thomas, Margaret's oldest boy, who'd grown into a tough young man over the winter, came down with the fever. Margaret's face went white when Clara confirmed it. "No," Margaret whispered. "Not my boy. Please, not my boy." "We'll fight it," Clara promised. "He's young, he's strong, he can beat this." But privately, she wasn't sure. The fever had killed the young and old alike. Strength didn't seem to matter. Thomas burned for 3 days straight. His fever spiked so high he became delirious, thrashing in his cot, calling for his dead father. Margaret sat beside him every moment, refusing to leave even when Clara tried to make her rest. On the third night, Clara was checking his temperature when Thomas's eyes suddenly focused. "Miss Clara?" he said. His voice was rough but clear. "Am I dying?" Clara's throat closed up. "Not if I have anything to say about it." "I'm awful hot." "I know, we're working on that." "Is my ma here?" Margaret leaned forward, grabbing his hand. "I'm right here, baby, right here." Thomas managed a weak smile. "Don't call me baby, Ma. I'm 12. And despite everything, Margaret laughed through her tears. Thomas's fever broke the next morning. Within days, others started recovering too. The fever seemed to have run its course through the population. Those who were going to die had died. Those who were going to survive were healing. The final count was devastating. 7 dead total. 3 children, 2 elderly people, 2 adults in their prime. In a settlement of 43 people, losing 7 was catastrophic. They buried them all on the hillside, a small cemetery that overlooked the valley, marked with rough wooden crosses that Gideon carved himself. Clara stood at each funeral, saying what words she could, though her voice grew hoarser with each service. After the last burial, she walked back to the hospital shed and methodically burned every piece of soiled bedding, every cloth that had touched the sick. She scrubbed the floor with lye soap until her hands bled. She wouldn't let anyone help her. When it was finally done, she walked out to the river and collapsed in the snow. Gideon found her there an hour later, just sitting, staring at the water. "You should be sleeping," he said, sitting down beside her. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces." The ones who died? The ones I couldn't save. They sat in silence for a long moment. The river burbled under its shelf of ice. Somewhere in the forest, a bird called out. "You saved 36 people," Gideon said finally. 36 people who would have died without you. Who would have given up or not known what to do, or just laid down and waited for the end. You kept them fighting, kept them hoping. That matters. Does it? When 7 are still dead? Yes. Gideon's voice was firm. It does. Every single person you saved has a family who still has them. Children who still have parents. Parents who still have children. That's not nothing, Clara. That's everything. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to feel like she'd done enough. But the weight of those 7 graves sat on her chest like stones. "The town wouldn't help us," she said quietly. "Black Hollow. When you went there begging for medicine, for a doctor, they turned you away." "I know. Because we're not worth helping. Because we're the outcasts, the broken ones, the people nobody wanted." Her voice cracked. "That's what they think. That's what they've always thought." Gideon took her hand. "Then we prove them wrong. We survive this. We rebuild. We make this valley into something so strong, so good, that they can't ignore it, that they can't dismiss it." "How?" "By doing what you've been doing, by helping people, by creating a place where everyone matters, where everyone has value, where nobody gets left behind." He squeezed her hand. "That's what you started when you took in Margaret and her kids, when you tended to Samuel, when you opened your door to every lost soul who wandered into this valley. You built something here that's bigger than just survival. You built a community." Clara looked at the settlement spread out below them, the cabins with smoke rising from their chimneys, the people moving between buildings, checking on neighbors, sharing what little they had. They'd survived together, lost together, grieved together. "It doesn't feel like enough," she whispered. "It's everything," Gideon said again. "And we're just getting started." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, the valley transformed. The snow melted in rushing torrents. The meadows turned green almost overnight. Flowers pushed up through the mud. Clara's wildflowers from the garden she'd planted that first year, gone to seed and spread across the valley. The air filled with birdsong and the smell of growing things. The survivors emerged from their cabins like people waking from a nightmare. Gaunt, haunted, but alive. Clara organized the spring planting with military precision. They'd lost people, which meant they'd lost labor, which meant they needed to be smarter about what they grew and how they grew it. She divided the valley into plots, assigned families to each one, created a system where everyone contributed and everyone benefited. "You're bossing people around," Margaret observed one afternoon, watching Clara direct 3 men on where to clear new fields. "I'm organizing," Clara corrected. "You're leading," Clara paused, considering. "I'm just doing what needs doing." "That's what leaders do," Margaret said with a smile. "They see what needs doing, and they make sure it gets done." The settlement grew throughout the spring and summer. More travelers arrived, heard about what happened during the winter, and some stayed anyway. A blacksmith named Owen who could fix tools and forge new ones. A woman named Ruth who'd been a teacher back east and immediately started organizing lessons for the children. A young couple, barely 20, who'd run away from their families and needed a place where nobody would ask questions. They all came to Clara, asked her permission to stay, asked her where they should build, asked her to settle disputes and make decisions and tell them what to do. Clara, who'd spent 32 years being told she was worthless, suddenly found herself responsible for 58 souls. It terrified her. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed to Gideon one night. They were in their cabin, finally alone after a day spent mediating an argument between 2 families over water rights. "I'm not educated. I'm not trained for this. I'm just me." "That's exactly why they trust you," Gideon said. He was working on a new harness for the ox they'd traded for. You're not trying to be something you're not. You're not putting on airs. You see a problem and you fix it. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, but you make it look that way. He set down the leather and looked at her. You know what you've built here? A place where people feel safe, where they feel valued, where a widow with 3 kids or a runaway couple or a failed shopkeeper can show up and find a home. That's rare, Clara. That's special. It's chaos, Clara muttered, but she was smiling. Organized chaos, Gideon amended. The best kind. By midsummer, the settlement had established real infrastructure. A communal kitchen where meals were prepared for those who were sick or working too hard to cook. A school where Ruth taught reading and writing and arithmetic to any child who wanted to learn. A meeting hall, finally built, a large log structure where they gathered for decisions and celebrations. Clara started holding weekly meetings in the hall. At first, it was just to coordinate work assignments and share resources, but gradually it became more than that. People brought up ideas, suggestions, complaints. They voted on major decisions. They worked together to solve problems. The settlement was governing itself, and Clara was at the center of it without ever meaning to be. One evening in August, a stranger rode into the valley. He was well dressed by frontier standards, clean clothes, good boots, a horse that looked well fed. He dismounted near the meeting hall where Clara was overseeing the construction of a new storage building. I'm looking for Clara Bellamy, he said. Clara straightened, wiping sawdust off her hands. You found her. The man looked surprised, taking in her work dress and the hammer she was holding. You're Clara Bellamy? The woman who runs this settlement? I don't run it. We all do. But yes, I'm Clara. What do you need? The man introduced himself as Daniel Morris, a land agent from the territorial government. He'd heard about the settlement and wanted to see if the rumors were true. Rumors? Clara asked warily. That there's a community up here in the high country. 40, 50 people, all living together, building something permanent. Morris looked around the valley, taking in the cabins, the fields, the obvious signs of organization. The territorial office is interested in recognizing settlements like yours, making them official, providing support. What kind of support? Legal recognition, for one, protection under territorial law, access to trading posts, maybe even an official designation as a township if you meet certain requirements. Clara's mind raced. Official recognition meant legitimacy. It meant they couldn't just be dismissed or ignored, but it also meant government oversight, taxes, regulations. What would we have to do? She asked carefully. Show that you have permanent residence, functional governance, economic viability, infrastructure. Morris pulled out a notebook. From what I can see, you've got most of that already. Impressive, really, for such a new settlement. They talked for hours. Morris stayed for dinner, meeting people, asking questions, taking notes. Gideon sat in on most of the conversation, his presence a silent reminder that Clara didn't have to navigate this alone. By the time Morris left the next morning, Clara had a head full of possibilities and problems. What do you think? She asked Gideon. I think it's your decision. Our decision, Clara corrected. This affects everyone. Then put it to a vote. Let the community decide. They held a meeting that night. Clara explained everything Morris had told her, the benefits and the risks, the potential for growth and the potential for government interference. The discussion went on for 2 hours. People had strong opinions on both sides. Some wanted the legitimacy and protection. Others feared losing their independence. Finally, Ruth the teacher stood up. I think we need to ask ourselves what we want this place to be. Is it a refuge where we hide from the world? Or is it a community that stands proud and demands recognition? Can it be both? Someone asked. Maybe, Ruth said. But I think we're past the point of hiding. We've built something here, something good. And maybe it's time the rest of the world acknowledged that. The vote was 38 in favor, 14 against, 6 abstaining. Rourke's Crossing, the name they'd started using without ever officially deciding on it, became a recognized settlement in the autumn of 1826. With recognition came change. Traders started coming through regularly, bringing supplies they could buy instead of having to make or trade for. A postal rider began including them on his route, which meant letters could reach the outside world, and vice versa. The territorial government sent a surveyor to map the valley and establish official property boundaries. Not everyone was happy about it. Bill, the trapper who'd been one of the first to settle, complained that they were losing what made the place special. "We're supposed to be free up here," he grumbled. "Free from rules and taxes and government telling us what to do." "You're still free," Clara said, "but now you're also protected. There's a difference." Protected from what? From being forgotten. From being dismissed. From being left to die when the next disaster hits. Bill didn't have an answer for that. The settlement continued to grow. By winter, they had 72 permanent residents and a handful of seasonal workers. They'd built a proper barn, a smokehouse, a mill for grinding grain. They'd established trade relationships with 3 other settlements and 2 native tribes. Clara found herself spending less time on manual labor and more time on administration, planning crop rotations, organizing work crews, mediating disputes, meeting with visitors. It exhausted her in a different way than physical work did. "You need to delegate more," Margaret told her one afternoon. "You can't do everything yourself." "I'm not doing everything. People help. People help when you ask them to, but you're still trying to carry the weight of this whole place on your shoulders." Margaret gave her a knowing look. "You're allowed to share the burden, Clara. That's what community means." So Clara started delegating. She put Helen in charge of food distribution. Catherine became responsible for managing the school. Owen the blacksmith took over maintaining tools and equipment. Margaret herself became the unofficial keeper of records, tracking who lived in the valley and what resources they had. It helped. But Clara still felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her every day. One December evening, she was working late in the meeting hall, trying to figure out food stores for the winter, when Gideon came in carrying 2 cups of tea. "You're going to work yourself to death," he said, setting 1 cup in front of her. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. You barely sleep. You barely eat. This place is important, but it's not worth destroying yourself over." Clara rubbed her eyes. "I just want to make sure everyone's taken care of." "They are. Because of you. But you know what happens if you break down?" Gideon sat across from her. "Everything you've built starts to fall apart. These people depend on you, which means you need to take care of yourself so you can take care of them." He was right. Clara knew he was right. But the fear of failing, of letting people down, of proving that she really was just the worthless woman Black Hollow had always claimed she was, that fear drove her harder than any ambition. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Every day I'm scared I'm going to make a mistake that gets someone hurt, that I'm going to prove I'm not capable of this." Gideon reached across the table and took her hand. "You've already proven you're capable. Every single day. You've taken this valley from nothing and turned it into a home for 72 people. You've survived a winter that would have killed half of them without your leadership. You've created something beautiful out of nothing but determination and compassion. It doesn't feel like enough. It never will. That's the burden of caring about people." His thumb rubbed across her knuckles. "But you're not alone in this. You've got me. You've got Margaret, Helen, Catherine, Owen. You've got a whole community of people who'd follow you into the wilderness because they trust you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "When did I become someone people trust? You always were." Black Hollow was just too blind to see it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their tea, listening to the wind outside. "There's something I've been thinking about," Gideon said eventually. "The settlement's getting too big for the cabins we've got. We need more permanent structures, real houses, not just shelters." "I know. I've been working on a plan for spring construction. I'm thinking bigger than that. I'm thinking we establish a real town center, a trading post, maybe a proper church for those who want it, a clinic for when people get sick." He paused. "We've got the resources now. We've got the people. We just need the organization." Clara looked at him, seeing the vision forming behind his eyes. "You want to build a real town. I want to build something that lasts, something that our children and grandchildren will still be living in 100 years from now." He squeezed her hand. "Something worthy of what you've started." Clara felt something expand in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or just the simple recognition that they'd come so far from that night in the saloon when Gideon had offered his hand and she'd taken it. "Then let's build it," she said. The winter of 1826 was milder than the previous one, but it still tested them. Food ran shorter than they'd planned. 3 families came down with a respiratory illness, that thankfully wasn't as deadly as the fever, but still laid people low for weeks. A fire broke out in one of the cabins and they barely managed to contain it before it spread. But they survived. They adapted. They helped each other. And when spring came again, they started building. The construction plans Gideon had sketched out during the winter looked simple on paper. A trading post here, expanded housing there, a proper clinic building near the center of the settlement. But turning those sketches into reality proved harder than either of them anticipated. The problem was labor. They had the people, but everyone was already stretched thin trying to keep up with daily survival. Fields needed tending, animals needed care, repairs never stopped. And now Clara was asking them to take on massive construction projects on top of everything else. "We need to bring in outside workers," Owen suggested during a planning meeting in late April. "Pay them to come up and help with the big projects. Then our people can focus on keeping things running." "Pay them with what?" Catherine asked. "We're barely scraping by as it is." "We've got furs," Gideon said. "Timber. I can run more trap lines, bring in pelts to trade. The lumber mill's producing enough that we can sell excess to the settlements downriver." Clara listened to them debate, her mind already calculating resources against needs. They could do it, she thought. It would be tight, maybe even risky, but they could make it work. "All right," she said finally. "Owen, you work with Gideon on figuring out what we can trade and for how much. Margaret, I need you to inventory our food stores and project what we'll need to get through next winter. If we're bringing in outside workers, we'll need to feed them too." The meeting broke up with everyone having assignments. Clara stayed behind, staring at the rough map of the settlement they'd pinned to the wall. So many plans. So many things that could go wrong. "You're doing it again," Gideon said from the doorway. "Doing what?" "Carrying all of it in your head, worrying yourself sick over every detail." Clara turned to face him. Someone has to worry about the details. And someone does. But that someone doesn't have to be you alone. He walked over and stood beside her, studying the map. "We've got good people here, smart people. Trust them to handle their pieces so you don't have to handle everything." "I do trust them." "Then act like it. Delegate and let go." Clara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Again. Gideon had a frustrating habit of being right about things she didn't want to admit. "Fine," she said. "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." The outside workers arrived in May, 6 men from a settlement 2 valleys over, looking for paid work during the growing season. They were rough types, the kind who didn't ask questions and didn't expect comfort, but they knew construction and they worked hard. Progress happened fast once they got started. The trading post went up first, a solid 2-story building with a covered porch and storage in the back. Owen set up a forge nearby so he could work while keeping an eye on trade goods. The clinic building came next, smaller but built with care, with separate rooms for treating different kinds of ailments. Clara watched it all take shape with a mix of pride and disbelief. This was really happening. They were building something permanent, something that would last. But there were problems too. Tensions rose as the settlement grew more crowded. Families who'd had space and privacy suddenly had neighbors close enough to hear arguments through the walls. Resources that had been sufficient for 70 people stretched thin, trying to cover 80, then 90. And not everyone was happy about the changes. Bill, the trapper who'd complained about government recognition, finally had enough in early June. Clara was inspecting the clinic construction when he confronted her. "This ain't what I signed up for," he said without preamble. "When I came to this valley, it was wild, free. Now you're turning it into just another town with rules and regulations and people packed in like sardines." Clara set down the timber she'd been examining. "We're growing, Bill. That's not a bad thing. It is when it changes everything that made this place worth living in." "So what do you want me to do? Turn away families who need help? Stop building shelter for people who have nowhere else to go?" "I want you to remember that some of us came here to get away from all that." Bill's face was red with frustration. "I want you to stop trying to recreate the towns we all left behind." Clara felt her own temper rising. "No one's forcing you to stay. If you want to go back to living alone in the wilderness, you're free to do that. But these people," she gestured at the settlement around them, "they need community. They need structure. They need more than just survival." "What they need," Bill said coldly, "is to remember that nature doesn't care about their feelings. Out here, soft gets you killed. And lonely gets you dead just as fast," Clara shot back. You can be the toughest man in the territory, but if you break your leg 10 miles from help, you'll die alone. That's what community prevents. That's what we're building here. Bill stared at her for a long moment, then spat in the dirt. You've changed, Clara. Used to be you understood what it meant to be an outcast. Now you're just another town boss telling people how to live. He walked away before Clara could respond. She stood there feeling like she'd been slapped. Was he right? Had she changed that much? She'd started this just wanting to help people, to create a safe place. But somewhere along the way it had become bigger than that, more complicated, more political. Don't let him get to you, Margaret said, appearing at her elbow. Bill's been unhappy since winter. Some people just don't like change, no matter how necessary it is. What if he's right, though? What if I'm pushing too hard, trying to make this into something it shouldn't be? You're trying to make it into a home. That's what it should be. Margaret squeezed her arm. Bill wants to stay wild and alone, that's his choice. But most of us want what you're building. We want stability, safety, a future. Clara nodded, but Bill's words stuck with her. She thought about them late at night when she couldn't sleep, wondered if she was losing sight of what had brought her here in the first place. Bill left the settlement a week later without saying goodbye to anyone, just packed his gear and headed into the high country. A few people muttered about it being a shame, but most seemed relieved. Easier to build without someone constantly complaining about progress. The summer pushed forward. The crops grew tall in the fields. The trading post opened for business, with Owen managing trade while his wife Sarah handled the accounts. The clinic building was finished, and Ruth the teacher volunteered to organize it since she had experience nursing sick family members back east. Everything was coming together. Everything was working. Then October hit, and with it came a cold snap that froze the valley 2 weeks earlier than expected. Clara woke one morning to ice on the inside of the cabin windows. "That's not right," she said, watching her breath fog in the air. "We shouldn't be getting hard freezes for another month at least." Gideon was already up, stoking the fire. "Old-timers say the weather's been getting stranger. Winter's coming earlier, staying later. Could just be a bad year. Or it could be the new normal." Clara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and moved closer to the fire. "Either way, we're not ready. The harvests aren't all in yet. Some of the cabins aren't properly winterized." "Then we work fast." They did. The entire settlement mobilized, racing against the weather to bring in the last of the crops, to seal gaps in walls, to lay in firewood for the long cold ahead. But it wasn't enough. 3 days of hard work, and they still had fields unharvested when the first major snow hit. It came down heavy and fast, burying everything under 2 feet of white in a single night. Clara stood in the doorway of her cabin the next morning, staring at the transformed valley in dismay. "We're going to lose half the potato crop," she said. "Maybe more." "Can't get to them through that snow," Gideon confirmed. "Ground will be frozen solid now anyway." Margaret appeared, bundling her coat tight. "Helen's saying we need to inventory what we did manage to save, figure out if we have enough to last the winter." They spent the day doing exactly that. The numbers weren't good. With 93 people to feed, the population had swelled with late-season arrivals, and food stores diminished by the early freeze. They were looking at rationing by midwinter. "We can make it work," Clara said during the emergency meeting she called that evening. "We'll need to be careful, stretch everything as far as it goes, but we can survive this." "What about hunting?" one of the newer settlers asked. "Can't we supplement with game?" "We can try," Gideon said. "But early winter means the animals are scattered. They haven't settled into their winter patterns yet. Hunting's going to be harder than usual." "We'll do what we have to do," Clara said firmly. "We've survived worse. We'll survive this too." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of worry settling in her chest. Food was one thing. They could ration, could make do. But there were other dangers that came with early winter. Isolation, illness, the kind of desperation that made people turn on each other. The first case of sickness appeared 2 weeks later. It started with the Fitzgerald family, newcomers who'd arrived in September with 2 young daughters. The oldest girl, maybe 6 years old, developed a cough that wouldn't go away. Then a fever. Then the younger daughter got it too. Claire examined them in the clinic, her heart sinking as she recognized the symptoms. "It's the same," she told Ruth quietly. "The same fever from last year." Ruth's face went pale. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They quarantined the Fitzgerald family immediately, moving them to the clinic's isolation room. But it was too late. Within days, 3 more people were showing symptoms, then 7, then 12. The fever had returned, and this time it hit harder and faster than before. Clara moved into the clinic full-time, barely leaving except to check on the rest of the settlement. The disease ripped through the population with terrible efficiency, young and old, strong and weak. It didn't discriminate. Margaret worked beside her again, preparing food and medicine, boiling endless pots of water, changing sweat-soaked bedding. Helen and Catherine pitched in when they could, but Catherine's husband fell sick on day 4, and she had to be physically removed from the clinic to prevent her from wearing herself out. "This is worse than last time," Margaret said on the 5th night. They were taking a brief break, sitting by the clinic fire with cups of weak tea. "It's spreading faster. Because we're more crowded now," Clara said bitterly. "More people packed closer together. I pushed for growth, and this is the result." "Stop that. You didn't make anyone sick, didn't I? If we'd stayed small, stayed manageable, maybe this wouldn't have spread so fast." Margaret grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt. "Clara Bellamy, you listen to me. People get sick. That's life on the frontier. You could have 50 people or 500. Disease doesn't care. What matters is what we do about it. And right now, we're fighting. So stop blaming yourself and keep fighting." Clara nodded numbly. Margaret was right. There'd be time for guilt later. Right now, people were dying. The death toll started climbing on day 6. An elderly man named Harrison who'd come to the valley looking for peace in his final years. One of the Fitzgerald daughters, the younger one, barely 4 years old. A trader who'd been caught in the valley when the snow hit and couldn't leave. 3 dead in one day. Clara stood over the covered bodies, her hands shaking with exhaustion and grief. This couldn't be happening again. They'd survived the last fever. They'd learned from it. They were supposed to be better prepared, but prepared didn't matter when you had no medicine, when the nearest doctor was 3 days away through impassable mountain passes, when all you had was willow bark tea and hope. Gideon came to her that night while she was working, grabbed her shoulders, and physically turned her to face him. "You need to sleep," he said. "I need to work. Clara, you're dead on your feet. You can't help anyone like this." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't slept in 3 days. You haven't eaten more than a few bites. If you collapse, what do you think happens to everyone else?" Clara tried to pull away, but Gideon held firm. "I can't stop," she said, and her voice cracked. "If I stop, if I rest, people die. And I can't lose anyone else. You're going to lose yourself if you keep this up." Then that's what happens. Gideon pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her. Clara resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, the weight of everything finally overwhelming her defenses. "I don't know how to save them," she whispered. "I'm doing everything I know, and it's not enough. It's never enough." "You're doing everything that can be done. That's all anyone can ask." "Is it? Because people are still dying." Gideon didn't have an answer for that. He just held her while she cried, exhausted tears that she'd been holding back for days. When Clara finally pulled away, she wiped her face roughly. "I'm going back to work. At least eat something first, please." Clara nodded. It was a small concession, but it was something. The fever raged through the settlement for 3 weeks. 23 days of horror that would scar everyone who survived it. The clinic beds filled, then the floor space. Then they had to start keeping people in their cabins and just checking on them throughout the day. The death count climbed to 6, then 9, then 12. Bodies piled up faster than they could bury them. The ground was frozen too hard for digging, so Gideon and the other men who weren't sick had to build a storage shed and line it with ice to preserve the dead until spring thaw. The smell of death hung over the valley like fog. Clara worked until she literally couldn't stand anymore. On day 17, she collapsed while checking on a patient. Ruth found her unconscious on the clinic floor and dragged her to a cot. When Clara woke up, it was dark outside and Gideon was sitting beside her bed. "How long?" she asked, her voice hoarse. 6 hours. I thought about letting you sleep longer, but I figured you'd be furious when you woke up." Clara tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest. "I need to." "Margaret's handling it. Ruth, too. They've got it under control." "But, Clara," Gideon's voice was gentle but firm, "you almost died. You worked yourself until your body gave out. If you go back out there right now, you will die. And if you die, a lot of other people will die too, because they need you. Clara stared at the ceiling, fighting the urge to get up and keep working. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She was so tired, so completely, devastatingly tired. How many? She asked quietly. Gideon didn't pretend not to understand. 12 dead, 31 still sick, 20 showing improvement. 12 dead. 12 people who'd come to this valley seeking safety, seeking hope, and found death instead. This is my fault, Clara said. No. Yes. I encouraged people to come here. I told them we could help them. I built a community that was too big to protect properly. This is on me. Gideon was quiet for a moment, then, you want to know what I think? Not really, but you're going to tell me anyway. I think you're taking responsibility for things you can't control. Disease happens. Death happens. It's awful and it's unfair and it breaks our hearts, but it happens. What you did, what you've been doing, is fighting it with everything you have. You've saved dozens of lives, dozens, and you've given people hope in a place where hope is hard to come by. Tell that to the 12 families who lost someone. I will. And I'll also tell them that without you, it would have been 30 dead. Or 50. Or everyone. You're the reason any of us are still alive. Clara closed her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel like she'd done enough, but the faces of the dead haunted her. Every single one. I need to tell you something, Gideon said after a long pause. I rode down to Black Hollow 4 days ago. Clara's eyes snapped open. What? We were desperate. I thought maybe, after everything, they'd be willing to help. Send a doctor or medicine, or just acknowledge that people were dying and they could do something about it. And? Gideon's jaw clenched. The mayor listened to my whole plea, told me he was sorry for our troubles. Then he said that frontier living was dangerous, and we'd made our choice to live out here. Said the town had its own problems and couldn't spare resources for people who'd chosen to leave. Clara felt fury rising through her exhaustion. They refused, and then Gideon's voice turned ice cold. The mayor's wife suggested that maybe this was nature's way of correcting things, that maybe we'd grown too big too fast and this was the valley's way of cutting us back down to size. The casual cruelty of it took Clara's breath away. These were the same people who'd mocked her in that saloon. The same people who'd spent years telling her she was worthless, and now they were watching people die and calling it natural selection. I'm going to destroy them, Clara said quietly. Gideon raised an eyebrow. What? Not with violence, not with revenge. But I'm going to build this settlement into something so successful, so vital, that they have to acknowledge us, that they have to respect us, that they can never dismiss us again. Clara, I mean it. They think we're going to fail. They think we're going to crumble and disappear. Then we're going to prove them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Gideon studied her face, then slowly smiled. All right then. But first you're going to rest, because you can't destroy anyone if you're dead. Clara managed a weak laugh. Fair point. She slept for another 8 hours. When she woke, the fever had started to break across the settlement. Not for everyone. They'd still lose 3 more people before it was over. But for most, the worst had passed. Clara returned to work, but this time she paced herself. Let Margaret and Ruth handle more. Delegated tasks instead of trying to do everything herself. It went against every instinct she had, but she forced herself to trust the people around her. The final death count was 15. 15 lives lost in a settlement of 93. Statistically better than the last outbreak, but statistics didn't matter to the families left behind. They held a memorial service on a bitterly cold November morning. Everyone who could stand gathered on the hillside where they'd buried the dead from the previous year. The ground was too frozen to dig new graves, so they'd have to wait until spring to bury the bodies they'd been preserving. Clara stood in front of the community, looking at the faces of people she'd come to know, to care about, to lead. They looked exhausted, traumatized, beaten down by loss and fear, but they were still here, still standing. We've lost 15 people, Clara said, her voice carrying across the frozen hillside. 15 lives that mattered. 15 people who came to this valley seeking something better and deserved more than they got. We can't bring them back. We can't undo what happened. All we can do is remember them and honor their memory by surviving, by continuing to build the community they believed in. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The wind whipped around them, but nobody moved. Black Hollow refused to help us, Claire continued. When we were dying, when we needed them most, they turned their backs. They said we chose this life and we had to live with the consequences. And you know what? They're right. We did choose this. We chose to leave their comfortable, cruel little town and build something better out here in the wilderness. A murmur ran through the crowd. But they're wrong about one thing, Clara said, her voice growing stronger. They think this will break us. They think we'll fail, crumble, disappear. They're waiting for us to prove them right, to prove that outcasts and broken people can't build anything that lasts. She looked around at the faces watching her. So we're going to prove them wrong. We're going to survive this winter. We're going to bury our dead with dignity when spring comes. And then we're going to build this settlement into something so strong, so vital, so necessary that nobody can ignore us. Not Black Hollow, not the territorial government, nobody. How? Someone called out. We barely have enough food to last the winter. Half our people are still recovering from the fever. How are we supposed to become something great when we can barely survive? Clara met the man's eyes. The same way we've done everything else. Together. One day at a time. One challenge at a time, we help each other. We don't give up. And we remember that every single person here has value, has worth, has something to contribute. She gestured around the hillside. These 15 people? They mattered. Their lives had meaning. And the best way we can honor them is by making sure their deaths weren't for nothing, by building the community they believed in, by being the family they deserved. Silence fell over the group. Then Margaret stepped forward. Claire's right, she said. We've been through hell. We've lost people we love. But we're still here, and as long as we're here, we keep fighting, we keep building, we keep hoping. Ruth joined her. I came to this valley because I had nowhere else to go. I was running from a life that had broken me, and I found people who saw me for who I was, not who I'd been. That's worth fighting for. One by one, people stepped forward, shared their stories, talked about why they'd come to Rourke's Crossing, what it meant to them, why they were willing to keep fighting. By the time the gathering ended, something had shifted. The despair hadn't disappeared. It was still there, heavy and real. But it was balanced now by determination, by purpose. They walked back down to the settlement together, a community bound by loss but strengthened by shared resolve. The winter that followed was brutal. Food ran low by January. They had to implement strict rationing, and even then, people went hungry more often than not. The cold was relentless. 3 more people died. 2 from pneumonia, 1 from an accident while cutting firewood. But the settlement held together. People shared what little they had, looked after each other, checked on neighbors, made sure nobody was forgotten or left behind. Clara worked harder than ever, but smarter now. She delegated, she trusted, she let other people carry part of the burden, and slowly, painfully, they survived. When the first thaw came in late March, it felt like a resurrection. The ice on the river broke with sounds like celebration. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath. Birds returned, filling the air with song. And on the hillside overlooking the valley, they finally buried their dead. 15 graves in neat rows. Wooden markers carved with names and dates. A testament to loss, but also to the community's resilience. Clara stood at the graveside, Gideon beside her, and watched as people placed flowers on the markers. Wildflowers that Clara had planted years ago, gone to seed and spread across the valley. A small beauty in the midst of so much grief. We made it, Gideon said quietly. Barely. Barely counts. Clara looked at him, this man who'd chosen her when nobody else would, who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd built this life with her, one difficult day at a time. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. We grow. We become everything you promised we would be. He smiled. We prove Black Hollow wrong. Clara took a deep breath of the spring air. Somewhere in the valley below, children were laughing. People were working in the fields. Life was returning. Then let's get started, she said. The rebuilding started with the fields. Every able-bodied person in Rourke's Crossing spent April and May breaking ground, planting seeds, coaxing life from soil that had been frozen for months. Clara worked alongside them, her hands blistered and bleeding by the end of each day. but she refused to ask others to do work she wouldn't do herself. The settlement had shrunk over the winter. 18 people had left after the fever broke, too traumatized or discouraged to stay. That left 75 souls, including the children. Smaller than they'd been, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe they'd grown too fast before, outpaced their ability to care for everyone properly. "We need to be smarter this time," Clara said during a planning meeting in early May. "Last year we focused on growth. This year we focus on sustainability. We build what we can actually maintain." "What about the trading post?" Owen asked. "It's sitting half empty. Seems like a waste." "It won't be empty for long," Gideon said. He'd been making trips down to other settlements, establishing trade relationships, spreading word about Rourke's Crossing. "I've got 3 traders interested in doing regular runs. We just need goods worth trading for." "We've got timber," someone pointed out. "And furs," another added. The trap lines this winter were good, even with everything else going on. Clara listened to them plan, felt something like hope stirring in her chest. They were thinking ahead, building for the future instead of just scrambling to survive the present. "There's something else," Margaret said. She'd been quiet through most of the meeting, which was unusual for her. "I've been keeping records of everything that happened during the fever. The timeline, the symptoms, what treatments worked and what didn't. I thought maybe we could share that information with other settlements. Help them prepare in case it hits them too." The room went quiet. Sharing that knowledge meant reliving the worst weeks of their lives, but it also meant potentially saving lives elsewhere. "That's good thinking," Clara said finally. "Get it written up properly. We'll send copies to every settlement within 3 days' ride." Margaret nodded, relief evident on her face. The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from crop rotation to building maintenance to the education schedule Ruth had put together for the children. By the time it ended, Clara felt exhausted but purposeful. They had direction. They had plans. They had hope. Summer arrived with a vengeance, hot and dry in a way that made everyone nervous. The river ran lower than usual. The crops grew, but slower than they should have. People checked the sky constantly, praying for rain that didn't come. "This is bad," Gideon said one evening in late June. They were standing at the edge of the main field, looking at corn that should have been waist-high, but barely reached their knees. "If we don't get rain soon, we're looking at a failed harvest." "We'll make it work," Clara said, though she didn't feel as confident as she sounded. "We've survived worse." "Have we?" "Because I'm not sure we can handle another winter of starvation, not after last year." Clara didn't have an answer for that. The rain finally came in early July, but it came wrong, all at once in violent storms that flooded fields and washed away topsoil. What the drought hadn't damaged, the floods finished off. By mid-July, it was clear the harvest would be poor at best. "We're going to have to buy food," Owen said flatly during an emergency meeting. "There's no way around it. We don't have enough to last the winter." "Buy it with what?" Catherine asked. "We spent most of our trade goods last year bringing in workers and supplies." "We've got timber," Gideon said, "and we can hunt more, bring in extra furs and meat to trade." "That won't be enough," Margaret said quietly. She'd been running the numbers and her face was grim. "Even if we trade everything we can spare, we'll still come up short. We need help." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Help. After everything they'd been through, after all their determination to stand alone, they needed help. "Then we ask for it," Clara said. Her voice was steady even though her stomach churned. "We reach out to the other settlements, see if anyone can spare supplies in exchange for future trade agreements. And if they can't?" Clara met Margaret's eyes. "Then we figure something else out. But we try this first." Gideon spent the next 2 weeks riding to every settlement within a week's journey. He came back with mixed results. 2 settlements agreed to trade food for timber and future considerations. One offered a small donation out of neighborly goodness. The rest politely declined, saying they had their own concerns to worry about. It helped, but it wasn't enough. "We're still 20% short of what we need," Margaret reported in early August. "Maybe more if winter runs long again." Clara stared at the numbers, her mind racing through options. They could ration more strictly, but people were already going hungry. They could send hunting parties out more frequently, but that meant less labor for other essential work. We could ask Black Hollow," Ruth said quietly. Every head in the room turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Gideon said immediately. "They refused to help us when we were dying," Catherine added. Why would they help us now? Because we'd be offering them something they want, Ruth said. Trade, regular, reliable trade with an established mountain settlement. Access to furs and timber and mountain guides. Black Hollow's economy depends on frontier trade, and we're positioned perfectly to facilitate it. Clara's mind churned through the implications. Ruth was right. Black Hollow would benefit significantly from a partnership with Rourke's Crossing. But the thought of going back there, of asking those people for help after they'd left the settlement to die, made her physically ill. I won't do it, she said. I won't beg them for anything. It wouldn't be begging, Ruth pressed. It would be negotiating, business. The answer is no. The meeting ended shortly after, but Clara couldn't shake the conversation. That night, lying beside Gideon in their cabin, she stared at the ceiling and turned the problem over and over. You're thinking about it, Gideon said. I'm not. You are. I can tell. Clara sighed. What if Ruth's right? What if there's a way to frame it that isn't about begging, but about mutual benefit? Clara, they mocked you. They refused to help when people were dying. Why would you want anything to do with them? Because 75 people are depending on me to keep them fed through the winter, and if swallowing my pride means they survive, then that's what I do. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. You know they'll see it as weakness, as you coming crawling back. Let them think whatever they want. I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it for our people. Our people, Gideon repeated softly. When did that happen? What? When did they become our people? When did you stop being the woman they mocked and start being the leader of a community? Clara thought about it. I don't know. Somewhere between the first winter and now, somewhere in the middle of all the dying and surviving and refusing to quit. Gideon took her hand in the darkness. If you're going to do this, I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm coming with you, he said firmly. You're not facing those people alone. They rode down to Black Hollow on a morning in late August. The journey took 2 days through mountain passes that Clara remembered from that first trip, when she'd followed Gideon into the wilderness not knowing if she'd survived the journey. 4 years ago. It felt like a lifetime. Black Hollow looked exactly the same weathered buildings, the same muddy streets, the same air of small-town judgment that Clara had lived under for 3 decades. They tied their horses outside the mayor's office, and Clara took a deep breath. You ready? Gideon asked. No, but that's never stopped me before. The mayor's office was a small room above the general store. They climbed the narrow stairs and found Mayor Harrison sitting behind a desk covered in papers, looking older and more tired than Clara remembered. He glanced up when they entered, and his eyes widened in recognition. Clara Bellamy, he said. I heard you were still alive up in those mountains. It's Clara Rourke now, she corrected. And yes, I'm alive, along with 75 other people. Is that so? Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her. I also heard you had some trouble last winter. Fever, wasn't it? Clara's jaw tightened. We did. 15 people died, no thanks to Black Hollow's assistance. Now, that's not quite fair. You refused to send help, Gideon interrupted, his voice hard. I came here begging for a doctor, for medicine, for anything, and you turned me away. Harrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. The town council felt it wasn't our responsibility to... I'm not here to argue about the past, Clara cut in. I'm here to discuss the future. Specifically, a trade partnership between Black Hollow and Rourke's Crossing. That got Harrison's attention. Trade partnership? Clara laid out the proposal she and Ruth had worked on. Regular supply runs from Black Hollow to the settlement. Food, tools, and other necessities in exchange for furs, timber, and exclusive access to mountain trade routes. Rourke's Crossing would serve as a hub for trappers and traders going deeper into the wilderness, and Black Hollow would get first pick of the goods coming out. It would significantly boost Black Hollow's economy, Clara concluded, and it would establish you as the primary gateway to the high country. Every other settlement would have to go through you to access our trade network. Harrison listened with growing interest. And what do you get out of this? Survival, Clara said bluntly. Our harvest failed. We need food to get through the winter. After that, we're self-sufficient. But right now, we need help. So you are begging. Clara felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice level. I'm negotiating. There's a difference. Harrison drummed his fingers on the desk. Let me understand this. You want me to convince the town council to provide supplies to the settlement that half our residents think deserve to fail, in exchange for trade advantages that won't materialize until next year at the earliest. That's about it, Clara said. And if I refuse? Then we find another way. We always do. But you'll have missed an opportunity to position Black Hollow as the most important trade hub in the territory. Clara leaned forward. Your town is dying, Mayor. I saw it on the way in. Half the storefronts are empty, the population's shrinking. People are leaving for bigger towns or heading west. You need this partnership as much as we do, maybe more. Harrison's expression darkened. That's quite a bold claim from someone who came here asking for help. It's the truth, and you know it. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Harrison sighed. I'll bring it to the council, but I can't promise anything. There's still a lot of bad blood about how you and others just up and left. We left because we weren't wanted here, Clara said quietly. Because people made it clear every single day that we were less than, that we were burdens, that we didn't matter. That's not... It is. And you know it. Clara stood. Bring it to your council. Tell them this is a business opportunity, not charity. Tell them we're offering them a chance to be part of something bigger than their small-minded prejudices. And tell them that whether they help us or not, Rourke's Crossing will survive. We always do. She walked out before Harrison could respond, Gideon following close behind. They were halfway down the stairs when they heard a voice behind them. Miss Clara, is that really you? Clara turned to find a young woman she vaguely recognized, Sarah Peterson, who'd been just a girl when Clara left. She was heavily pregnant now, maybe 8 months along, and her face was lit up with genuine pleasure. It is you! Sarah rushed forward as fast as her belly would allow. I heard rumors you'd married Gideon Rourke and gone to the mountains, but I thought surely they were exaggerating. But here you are. Here I am, Clara said, caught off guard by the warm reception. I have to tell you, you're something of a legend among the younger folks here. The woman who escaped Black Hollow and built a whole settlement in the wilderness. It's terribly romantic. Clara almost laughed. Romantic. There was nothing romantic about the last 4 years. It's been hard work more than romance, I'm afraid. Still, you did it. You got out. Sarah's expression turned wistful. Some of us are still stuck here. You could leave, Clara said. If Black Hollow doesn't suit you, there are other options. With a baby on the way? My husband would never agree. He's got family here, obligations. Sarah shook her head. But maybe someday. Maybe when the children are older. They talked for a few more minutes before Sarah had to go. As Clara watched her waddle away, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Pity for the woman stuck in a life she didn't want. Gratitude that Clara herself had escaped. And a growing realization that maybe she'd misjudged some of Black Hollow's residents. Not all of them had been cruel. Some had just been stuck. Trapped by circumstance and convention, unable to imagine a different life. The town council meeting was scheduled for 2 days later. Clara and Gideon stayed at the boarding house where Clara had once worked, enduring whispers and stares from people who remembered the fat, pathetic woman she used to be. Except she didn't look like that woman anymore. 4 years of frontier living had transformed her. She was still heavy, but it was the solid weight of muscle and hard work. Her hands were calloused. Her face was weathered by sun and wind. She moved with confidence she'd never had before. Some people didn't recognize her at first. When they did, the reactions varied from shock to resentment to something that might have been respect. On the evening before the council meeting, Clara was sitting on the boarding house porch when a familiar figure approached. Mayor Harrison's wife. Clara stood slowly, preparing for confrontation. This was the woman who'd suggested that the fever was nature correcting their settlement's size, the woman who'd laughed when Gideon begged for help. Mrs. Harrison stopped at the base of the porch steps. She looked older than Clara remembered, with deep lines around her eyes and mouth. Mrs. Rourke, she said formally. Mrs. Harrison. An awkward silence stretched between them. I came to apologize, Mrs. Harrison said finally. The words seemed to cost her something. For what I said last winter, when your people were sick, it was cruel and unchristian, and I've regretted it ever since. Clara studied the older woman's face, looking for signs of insincerity. She found none, just genuine shame. Why? Clara asked. Why say such a thing in the first place? Mrs. Harrison's shoulders sagged. Because I was angry. My son left Black Hollow 3 years ago to go west, and I haven't heard from him since. Every time someone else leaves, it feels like another piece of this town dying, and when people started going to your settlement instead of staying here, She trailed off. I took it personally, which was wrong. Those people weren't mine to keep. No, Claire agreed. They weren't. But that doesn't excuse what I said. Your people were suffering, and I dismissed their pain because I was wrapped up in my own. Mrs. Harrison met Clara's eyes. I heard about the 15 you lost, including children, and I was ashamed, because if my son had been among them, if he'd needed help and someone had refused because of petty grudges, I would have been devastated. Clara felt her throat tighten. She'd expected a lot of things from this encounter, but not genuine remorse. I forgive you, she said quietly. Not because what you said was okay, but because holding on to anger won't bring back the people we lost. And because I'm tired of carrying that weight. Mrs. Harrison's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I don't deserve it, but thank you. After she left, Gideon came out onto the porch. You heard all that? Clara asked. Most of it. He sat down beside her. You're a better person than I am. I'm not sure I could have forgiven her. I didn't do it for her. I did it for me. Clara leaned against him. Besides, if we're going to work with Black Hollow, we can't hold grudges forever. Has to start somewhere. Assuming the council agrees to the partnership. Assuming that, Clara acknowledged. The town council meeting was held in the Red Mare Saloon, the same place where Gideon had chosen Clara 4 years ago. Walking back into that room felt surreal. Clara could almost see the ghost of her younger self sitting in the shadows, alone and hopeless, not knowing that her entire life was about to change. The council consisted of Mayor Harrison, 3 prominent businessmen, and Mrs. Peterson, who served as the town clerk. They sat at a table in the center of the room while a handful of curious townspeople gathered to watch. Harrison called the meeting to order and invited Clara to present her proposal. She stood and laid it out clearly and professionally. The trade routes, the economic benefits, the mutual advantage. She kept emotion out of it, framed everything in terms of business opportunity. When she finished, the council members exchanged glances. It's an interesting proposal, one of the businessmen said, but I have concerns about reliability. What happens if your settlement fails? We'd be left with nothing. Rourke's Crossing has survived 2 deadly fevers, a failed harvest, and one of the harshest winters in recent memory, Clara said. We're not going anywhere. Still, 75 people isn't exactly a robust economy. It's 75 people now, Clara interrupted, but we're growing. Once word spreads about the trade opportunities, more settlers will come, more trappers, more traders. The high country is opening up, and we're positioned right at the center of it. Another council member spoke up. What about the furs and timber you're promising? Do you actually have the capacity to deliver on those quantities? Gideon stood. I've been trapping these mountains for 20 years. I know every valley, every pass, every place the animals run. With the right organization, we can deliver everything we promised and more. The questions continued for another hour. Clara answered each one as best she could, backed up by Gideon when needed. By the end, she was exhausted but hopeful. She'd made her case as strongly as possible. Harrison called for a vote. All in favor of entering into a trade partnership with Rourke's Crossing? 3 hands went up immediately. Then, after a pause, a 4th. Motion carries, Harrison said. We'll draft a formal agreement outlining terms and expectations. Mrs. Rourke, you'll need to sign on behalf of your settlement. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely she almost sat down. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd secured the help they needed. But then Mrs. Peterson spoke up. I have one condition, she said, before we finalize anything. Clara's heart sank. What condition? I want to see the settlement of yours. I want to understand what we're partnering with, and, she hesitated, I want to know if what people are saying is true. What are people saying? That you've built something special up there. Something different. A place where people who don't fit in anywhere else can find a home. Mrs. Peterson looked directly at Clara. My granddaughter is 15. She's sharp as a tack, but there's no future for her here. Black Hollow doesn't value educated women. I've been wondering if maybe... if there might be opportunities for her in Rourke's Crossing. Clara understood immediately. This wasn't just about trade. It was about hope, about possibilities. "Come see for yourself," Clara said. "Come to the settlement, meet the people, see what we've built, then make your decision." "I will," Mrs. Peterson said. "And if it's everything I've heard, then this partnership won't just be about trade. It'll be about building a future." The formal agreement was signed 3 days later. Black Hollow would provide food supplies on credit, to be repaid with furs and timber over the following year. They'd also establish a regular trade route with wagons running between the town and the settlement twice a month. In exchange, Rourke's Crossing would give Black Hollow exclusive access to their trade network for the first year, after which the agreement would be renegotiated. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Clara and Gideon prepared to head back to the settlement, their saddlebags packed with the first installment of supplies. Mrs. Peterson would follow in 2 weeks, once she'd made arrangements. On their last morning in Black Hollow, Clara stood outside the Red Mare Saloon one final time. So much had changed since that night 4 years ago. She'd changed. The world had changed. A small crowd had gathered to see them off, not hostile but curious. Among them was Sarah Peterson, waving cheerfully. Mrs. Harrison, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Even a few people Clara didn't recognize, drawn by curiosity about the woman who'd left and built something worth coming back for. Mayor Harrison approached as Clara was checking her horse's saddle. "I underestimated you," he said bluntly. "When you left 4 years ago, I thought you'd be back within a year, broken and desperate. I was wrong." "Yes," Clara said simply. "You were. The question is, what happens now? You've got your trade agreement. But what do you really want from Black Hollow?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I want you to remember that the people you dismissed, the ones you thought were worthless, built something remarkable. I want you to think about that the next time you judge someone for being different, or poor, or not fitting into your narrow definition of valuable." She swung up into the saddle, looking down at Harrison. "And mostly," she continued, "I want you to understand that you need us more than we need you. We would have survived without this partnership. We always do. But you? Your town is dying, and partnering with the outcasts you rejected might be the only thing that saves it." She didn't wait for his response. She and Gideon rode out of Black Hollow together, heading back to the mountains, back to the community they'd built from nothing. Behind them, the people of Black Hollow watched them go, and for the first time in anyone's memory, they did so without mockery or contempt. They watched with something that looked almost like respect. The return journey took 3 days because of the supplies they were carrying. When they crested the final ridge and looked down into their valley, Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. Home. This was home. The settlement spread out below them, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving between buildings, children playing near the river. It wasn't much compared to established towns, but it was theirs. They'd barely reached the valley floor when people started emerging from cabins. Margaret was first, followed by Ruth, Catherine, Owen, and dozens of others. By the time Clara and Gideon dismounted, they were surrounded. "Well?" Margaret demanded. "What happened?" Clara couldn't help grinning. "We got the partnership. Food supplies are secured. Black Hollow's going to help us through the winter." A cheer went up. People hugged each other, laughed, cried with relief. The tension that had been building all summer finally broke, but Clara held up her hand for quiet. "There's more," she said. "Mrs. Peterson is coming to visit in 2 weeks. She wants to see what we've built. And if we impress her, this could be about more than just trade. This could be about proving to the whole territory that Rourke's Crossing is something special." "Then we'd better make sure everything's perfect," Ruth said. "Not perfect," Clara corrected. "Just honest. We show her exactly what we are. A community of people who didn't fit anywhere else, who came together and built something worth having. We don't pretend to be more than we are. We just show her the truth." Margaret smiled. "The truth is pretty damn impressive." Over the next 2 weeks, the settlement prepared. Not by hiding their struggles or putting on false fronts, but by being themselves. They cleaned up the common areas, made sure the buildings were in good repair, organized the schools so Mrs. Peterson could see how they educated the children, but mostly, they just lived their lives. Worked their fields, tended their animals, helped each other with the endless tasks of frontier survival. When Mrs. Peterson arrived, accompanied by her granddaughter Emma and two other Black Hollow residents, Clara greeted them at the valley entrance. "Welcome to Rourke's Crossing," she said simply. Mrs. Peterson looked around with sharp, assessing eyes. "Show me everything." Clara did. She showed them the cabins, the meeting hall, the school, the trading post, the clinic. She introduced them to people from all walks of life, widows and orphans, former criminals and runaway wives, mixed blood families, and anyone else who didn't fit into conventional society. She showed them the cemetery on the hillside, with its 22 graves. Didn't hide the loss or pretend it hadn't happened. "This is who we are," Clara said. "We're not perfect. We've lost people. We've made mistakes. We've struggled and failed and barely survived more times than I can count. But we're here. We're building something that matters, and we're not going anywhere." Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a long time, looking at the settlement spread out below them. "My granddaughter," she said finally. "Emma. She's brilliant. Could probably run circles around half the men in Black Hollow. But there's no future for her there. She'll end up married to some farmer, wasting her potential on cooking and cleaning." She turned to face Clara. "If I sent her here, would you teach her? Not just reading and writing, but real skills. Business, leadership, whatever she needs to make something of herself?" Clara looked at Emma, who was watching with hope and fear mixed on her young face. "We teach everyone here," Clara said. "Age, gender, background, none of that matters. If she wants to learn, we'll teach her. If she wants to contribute, we'll give her opportunities. If she wants to be more than what Black Hollow would let her be, then yes, this is the place for that." Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. "Then she stays. If she wants to." "I want to," Emma said immediately. "I really, really want to." Over the next few days, Mrs. Peterson toured every inch of the settlement. She sat in on lessons at the school, watched the trade negotiations at the post, helped Margaret with the record keeping, and was impressed by the organizational systems in place. On her last evening, she asked to speak with Clara privately. They sat on the porch of Clara's cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I'm going to be honest with you," Mrs. Peterson said. "When I first heard about this place, I thought it was just another failed settlement waiting to happen. The frontier's littered with them, people with big dreams and no practical sense. And now? Now I think you might actually survive. More than that, I think you might thrive." She paused. "But you need to understand what you're up against. Black Hollow agreed to this partnership because it benefits them economically. But a lot of people there still think you're going to fail. They're waiting for it, hoping for it, some of them." "I know. So when you succeed, and I say when, not if, it's going to change things. People are going to have to confront the fact that they were wrong about you, about all of this. Some will accept that gracefully, others won't." Clara smiled grimly. "I'm not doing this to prove anything to Black Hollow. I'm doing it for the people here." "I know, but you're going to prove something anyway. You already have, just by surviving this long." Mrs. Peterson stood. "My granddaughter's going to stay. I'll send her belongings with the next supply wagon. And Clara, thank you for giving her a chance at something better. Thank you for trusting us with her." After Mrs. Peterson left, Clara sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. 4 years ago, she'd been the woman everyone mocked. Now she was the leader of a community that Black Hollow itself had to acknowledge and respect. Gideon came out and sat beside her. "You did it," he said. "You proved them wrong." "We did it," Clara corrected. "All of us." "But you led the way. You were the one who refused to give up, who kept fighting when it would have been easier to quit." Clara leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I just did what needed doing. That's what leaders do." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the valley. Below them, lamplight glowed in cabin windows. Somewhere, someone was playing a fiddle. Children's laughter echoed across the meadow. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was theirs, built with sweat and tears and determination. And it was only the beginning. The years that followed moved faster than Clara could have imagined, each season bleeding into the next with a rhythm that felt both exhausting and exhilarating. The partnership with Black Hollow proved more valuable than anyone had predicted. Trade wagons came twice a month, then weekly as demand grew. Trappers and traders who'd once bypassed the high country started making regular stops at Rourke's Crossing, drawn by fair prices and honest dealing. Emma. Emma Peterson turned out to be everything her grandmother had promised. Sharp, driven, with a head for numbers that put Margaret's record-keeping to shame. Within a year, she was managing the trading post's accounts. Within 2, she was negotiating contracts that brought in revenue Clara hadn't dreamed possible. "You're going to run this whole place someday," Clara told her one afternoon in the spring of 1829. They were reviewing ledgers in the trading post, Emma pointing out opportunities for expansion. Emma laughed. "I don't want to run it. That's your job. I just want to make sure it's profitable enough to last." "Why? You could go anywhere now. You've got skills, experience, money saved. You could head to a big city, start a real business." "This is a real business," Emma said, looking offended. "And why would I leave? Everything I care about is here." Clara understood that feeling completely. The settlement's population had grown to 147 by 1830. New cabins went up every few months. The school expanded, with Ruth training 2 assistant teachers to handle the growing number of children. Owen's forge became a proper smithy with 2 apprentices. The clinic, after years of sitting mostly empty, finally got a real doctor when a physician named Samuel Morris arrived fleeing a scandal back east. "I made mistakes," Dr. Morris told Clara bluntly when he asked to stay. "Treated the wrong people, charged too much, got too comfortable. My wife left me. My practice collapsed. I've got nothing but my medical bag and too much pride to go crawling back." "Can you do the work?" Clara asked. "Better than anyone within 100 miles. Then do it. We don't care about who you were. We care about who you are now." Dr. Morris proved as good as his word. He set up a proper medical practice, trained several women in basic nursing, and established protocols for handling everything from childbirth to injuries to disease outbreaks. When the inevitable fevers and illnesses came, and they did, every winter, the settlement was prepared. The death rate dropped dramatically. People still died, of course. Old Joseph Grant's widow passed peacefully in her sleep at 73. A young man named Peter fell from a roof during construction and didn't survive the night. A little girl drowned in the river despite frantic rescue attempts. But the catastrophic losses of those early years didn't repeat. The settlement had learned, adapted, built systems that protected its most vulnerable. Gideon's role evolved too. He spent less time on trap lines and more time establishing relationships with native tribes, other settlements, and territorial officials. His reputation as a fair dealer and honest negotiator spread. People sought him out to mediate disputes, to guide expeditions, to provide counsel on frontier matters. "Never thought I'd end up a politician," he grumbled one evening. They were in their cabin, expanded twice now, with a real bedroom, a proper kitchen, and even a small study where Clara did administrative work. "You're not a politician," Clara said, looking up from the letter she was writing to a settlement 3 valleys over. "You're a leader. There's a difference." "Feels the same to me. Too much talking, not enough doing." "The talking is the doing now. The settlement's big enough that we need diplomacy, not just muscle." Gideon grunted, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right. Their relationship had deepened over the years into something that felt unshakable. They'd been through too much together, survived too many crises, built too much side by side to ever doubt each other now. Clara couldn't remember exactly when she'd fallen in love with him. It had happened so gradually, so naturally, that there was no single moment to point to. But she loved him, deeply, completely, in the quiet, steady way that came from truly knowing someone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one night. They were lying in bed, the sound of rain on the roof lulling them towards sleep. "Choosing me that night in the saloon?" Gideon was quiet for so long she thought he'd dozed off. Then, "Every damn day." Clara's breath caught. "I regret that I didn't do it sooner," Gideon continued, "that I wasted years living alone when I could have had this. You, us." He pulled her closer. "Choosing you was the smartest thing I ever did. Only regret is that it took me so long to do it." Clara pressed her face against his chest, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I was so certain you'd made a mistake, that you'd wake up one day and realize you'd chosen wrong." "Never, not once." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, 2 people who'd found home in the most unexpected way. But not everything was smooth. The settlement's growth brought new challenges that tested Clara's leadership in ways she hadn't anticipated. In the summer of 1831, a group of 23 people arrived from a failed settlement 200 miles south. Their own community had collapsed after a series of disasters, and they'd heard Rourke's Crossing was accepting newcomers. The problem was, they brought attitudes Clara hadn't dealt with before, a sense of entitlement, an expectation that they should have immediate say in how things were run, despite having contributed nothing yet. Their leader, a man named Robert Chambers, demanded a seat on the settlement council within a week of arriving. "We're not charity cases," he said during a heated meeting. "We're experienced settlers. We know how to run a community. And frankly, some of your systems here are inefficient." Clara felt her temper rising but kept her voice level. "What specifically do you find inefficient?" "The way you distribute resources, the decision-making process, the fact that you let women and half-breeds have equal say in important matters." Robert's tone made it clear what he thought of that arrangement. The room went dead silent. Margaret, sitting beside Clara, looked like she wanted to punch Robert. Emma's face had gone carefully blank, but Clara saw her hands clench into fists. "I see," Clara said quietly. "Let me be very clear about something, Mr. Chambers. This settlement was built by people who didn't fit anywhere else. Women, mixed-blood families, former criminals, runaways, outcasts of every variety. We don't just tolerate diversity here. We require it. It's what makes us strong." "That's a lovely sentiment," Robert said condescendingly. "But the reality is—" "The reality," Clara interrupted, her voice like iron, "is that you came here asking for help. We've provided shelter, food, and a chance to rebuild. In return, we expect respect for our values and our systems. If you can't do that, you're free to leave." Robert's face flushed red. "You're making a mistake. We could help you build something much better than this ragtag—" "Get out," Gideon said. He'd been standing in the back of the room, but now he moved forward, and there was something in his posture that made Robert step back. "You've got until tomorrow morning to decide. Stay and follow our rules, or pack up and find somewhere else. Your choice." Robert sputtered, looked around for support, found none. Even the people who'd come with him looked uncomfortable. He left. 2 other families from his group went with him. The remaining 20 stayed and after a few weeks of adjustment, integrated into the community. Some even became valuable contributors. But the incident left Clara shaken. What if he was right, she asked Margaret that evening. What if our systems are inefficient? What if we're being too idealistic? Idealistic? Margaret laughed. Clara, we've survived 8 years in the wilderness. We've built a thriving settlement from nothing. We've weathered fevers, famines, harsh winters, and prejudice from every direction. If that's idealism, then idealism works better than whatever practical wisdom Robert Chambers was selling. But what if? No what ifs. Look at what we've actually built. Look at Emma, running our trade operations better than any man twice her age. Look at Dr. Morris, who was a failure everywhere else but is thriving here. Look at Thomas, Margaret's son, now 18 and one of the best woodsmen in the territory. Look at all the people who came here broken and found ways to heal. Margaret grabbed Clara's shoulders. You didn't build this place by being practical and efficient. You built it by being compassionate and stubborn and refusing to accept that some people matter less than others. Don't let men like Robert make you doubt that. Clara nodded slowly. Margaret was right. She usually was. The settlement continued to evolve. By 1833, they had 193 residents. The trading post was doing business with settlements as far as 3 weeks' ride away. The school was teaching 47 children, and Ruth had started an evening program for adults who'd never learned to read. Rourke's Crossing had a reputation now, a settlement that welcomed anyone, that treated people fairly regardless of background, that had survived everything the frontier could throw at it, and people noticed. The territorial governor himself visited in the fall of 1834, accompanied by 2 officials and a small military escort. It was a huge event. The settlement spent weeks preparing, though Clara insisted they not try to make themselves into something they weren't. Governor Mitchell was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who'd made a career of frontier politics. He toured the settlement with obvious interest, asking pointed questions about governance, economics, and sustainability. Over dinner in the meeting hall, surrounded by the settlement's leadership, he finally got to the point. I'm going to be blunt, Mrs. Rourke. The territorial legislature is considering several settlements for official township status. That would come with significant benefits: legal recognition, protective services, representation in territorial government. But it also comes with expectations. What kind of expectations? Clara asked. Proof of stable governance, economic viability, population thresholds, the ability to maintain order and provide services. Mitchell paused. Rourke's Crossing meets most of these requirements already. What concerns me is the unconventional nature of your leadership structure. Meaning? Meaning you're a woman in a position of authority. Meaning you allow people of questionable background to participate in decision-making. Meaning your settlement operates on principles that some would consider dangerously progressive. Clara felt the old familiar anger rising. And you're suggesting we change those things to earn official recognition? I'm suggesting that recognition comes with scrutiny, and scrutiny might not look favorably on certain arrangements. Gideon leaned forward. Governor, with respect, this settlement has survived and thrived precisely because of our so-called unconventional arrangements. Change them, and you'd be destroying what makes this place work. I understand that. I'm simply warning you of the political realities. Clara stood. Then let me be clear about our reality, Governor. We built this settlement from nothing. We survived fevers that killed 15 people. We made it through winters that would have destroyed lesser communities. We created a place where people who were rejected everywhere else could find dignity and purpose. And we did all of that without official recognition, without government support, without anyone's approval but our own. She looked Mitchell directly in the eye. If township status requires us to compromise our values, then we don't want it. We'll continue as we are, independent and free, taking care of our own the way we always have. But if the territory is willing to recognize us as we actually are, unconventional leadership and all, then we'll gladly accept that partnership. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. That's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear. What? Mrs. Rourke, I didn't come here to convince you to change. I came to see if you'd stand by your principles when challenged, because the territory needs settlements like yours. We need leaders who won't compromise their values for political convenience. We need communities that prove different kinds of people can work together successfully. He stood and offered his hand. You'll have your township status, and you'll have it without changing a damn thing about how you operate. I'll see to it personally. The official recognition came through in the spring of 1835. Rourke's Crossing became one of the first officially designated townships in the high country. With it came legal protections, trading advantages, and a voice in territorial governance. But more importantly, it came with validation. Proof that what they'd built mattered, that it was legitimate and valuable and worth protecting. The celebration lasted 3 days. People came from other settlements to mark the occasion. There was music, dancing, more food than they'd seen in one place since the settlement's founding. Clara watched it all with a mix of pride and disbelief. This was real. They'd actually done it. Late on the second night, after most people had gone to bed, but a few were still celebrating around a bonfire, Clara slipped away to the hillside cemetery. She did this sometimes when things felt too big or overwhelming, came to sit with the dead and remember. 22 graves now. The 15 from the second fever. The 7 from the first. Each one a person who'd mattered, who'd contributed, who deserved better than they got. We did it, she said quietly to the stones. We made it. I wish you could see what we've built. They can see it. Clara turned to find Gideon standing a few yards away. I didn't hear you follow me. Old habit, quiet feet. He came to stand beside her. You come up here a lot. They deserve to be remembered, especially on days like this. They are remembered. Every time we help someone new, every time we choose compassion over convenience, every time we refuse to give up on people the way the world gave up on them. Gideon put his arm around her shoulders. That's their legacy. Clara leaned against him, looking down at the settlement spread out below. Lamplight and firelight, laughter and music, life continuing in the valley they'd carved out of wilderness. I'm 50 years old, she said quietly. When did that happen? Same way it happens to everyone, one day at a time. I thought by now I'd feel like I knew what I was doing, like I had it all figured out. Gideon laughed. And do you? Not even a little bit. Every day I'm terrified I'm going to make a mistake that ruins everything. That's how you know you're doing it right. The people who think they have all the answers are the dangerous ones. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the celebration continue below. What happens now? Clara asked finally. What do you mean? We've achieved what we set out to do. built a successful settlement, got official recognition, proved everyone wrong. So what comes next? Gideon considered the question. We keep going, keep building, keep helping people, keep being the place where broken things can be fixed. That simple? That's simple. The years rolled on. The settlement grew to 250 people by 1837, 300 by 1839. They built a proper town square, a larger school, a second trading post to handle increased commerce. The cemetery on the hillside continued to fill, but at a slower pace now. Natural deaths, mostly. Old age and accidents, the normal toll of frontier life. Clara's hair went gray, then white. Her joints ached on cold mornings. She moved a little slower, got tired a little faster. But she kept working, kept leading, kept refusing to quit. Gideon aged too, his beard going fully white, his massive frame starting to stoop. But he was still strong, still capable, still the steady presence Clara had learned to depend on. In the winter of 1840, they sat down with the settlement council and made an announcement. "We're stepping back," Clara said. The words felt strange in her mouth. "Not completely. We'll still be here, still be part of the community, but we're getting too old to handle day-to-day leadership. It's time for the next generation to take over." The reaction was immediate and loud. People protested, insisted Clara and Gideon were still needed, that the settlement couldn't function without them. But Emma, now 29 and easily the most respected person in the settlement after Clara and Gideon, stood up. "They're right," she said firmly. "Clara's taught us everything we need to know. She's built systems that work. She's raised up leaders who can continue what she started. The best way to honor what she's done is to prove we can maintain it without her." It took months to transition power. Clara worked with Emma and a council of 6 others, teaching them everything she knew about resource management, conflict resolution, long-term planning. Gideon did the same with the men who'd handle security and external relations. By the spring of 1841, the transition was complete. Clara and Gideon officially retired from leadership, though everyone knew they were still available for advice and counsel. It felt strange at first, not being responsible for everything, but it also felt liberating. Clara discovered she had time for things she'd neglected for years. She worked in her garden, the one she'd started 17 years ago that had grown into something beautiful. She spent time with the children in the settlement, teaching them herb lore and frontier medicine. She wrote letters to other settlements, sharing knowledge and building connections. And she spent time with Gideon, just being together, without the constant pressure of leadership hanging over them. They'd been married nearly 18 years by then. Not the passionate, dramatic romance of stories, but something deeper. Something built on shared struggle and mutual respect, and the quiet knowledge that they'd found exactly who they were meant to find. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on their porch watching the sunset when a rider came into the settlement. A young man, maybe 25, travel-worn and exhausted. He asked around and was eventually directed to Clara's cabin. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, dismounting. "I'm James Peterson, Emma's younger brother. My grandmother sent me with a message." Clara's heart clenched. Mrs. Peterson was 93 now, still living in Black Hollow despite Emma's repeated invitations to move to the settlement. "What's happened?" "She's dying. The doctor says it's just age, that her body's worn out. But she asked for you, said she needed to speak with you one last time." Clara looked at Gideon. He nodded. "I'll get the horses ready," he said. They rode to Black Hollow for what Clara knew would be the last time. The journey took 2 days, and when they arrived, the town looked even more diminished than Clara remembered. Half the buildings stood empty. The population had shrunk dramatically as people moved to bigger towns or went west. Black Hollow was dying, slowly but surely. Mrs. Peterson was in her small house near the center of town, attended by a young woman Clara didn't recognize. The old woman looked tiny in her bed, shrunken with age, but her eyes were still sharp. "Clara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came." Clara pulled a chair close to the bed and took Mrs. Peterson's hand. "I wanted to thank you for everything you did for Emma. She writes me letters, tells me about her life there. She's happy, successful, more than she ever could have been here. Emma's success is her own. I just gave her the opportunity. You gave her more than that. You gave her a place where her worth wasn't determined by her gender or her connections, where she could be valued for her actual abilities." Mrs. Peterson's grip tightened weakly. I was wrong about you all those years ago. When you left Black Hollow, I thought you were making a mistake. I pitied you. I know. But you were the smart one. You got out. You built something better. And the rest of us just stayed, watching this place die around us, too stubborn or too scared to change. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It's not too late. You could still come to the settlement, live your final years somewhere beautiful. No, I'm too old to move now. This is where I'll die. Mrs. Peterson smiled faintly. But knowing that Emma's there, that she's part of what you built, that brings me peace. They talked for another hour. Mrs. Peterson sharing stories about Emma's childhood, asking about the settlement, wanting to hear about everything Clara had accomplished. When the old woman finally fell asleep, Clara kissed her forehead gently and slipped out. Mrs. Peterson died 3 days later. Emma rode down for the funeral, along with several others from the settlement who'd known her. They buried her in the Black Hollow Cemetery, next to her husband who'd died 20 years earlier. After the funeral, the mayor approached Clara. It was a new mayor now. Mayor Harrison had died 5 years back. This was a younger man, maybe 40, who looked exhausted and overwhelmed. Mrs. Rourke, he said, I don't suppose you're interested in taking over a dying town? Clara almost laughed. Not particularly, no. Figured as much, but I had to ask. He looked around at the near-empty streets. We're down to 63 people. Most of our businesses have closed. The young people leave as soon as they're old enough. Another 5 years and Black Hollow will be a ghost town. I'm sorry. Don't be. We made our choices. We clung to the old ways, rejected the people who wanted to try something different, turned away folks who could have helped us grow. He met her eyes. We turned you away. All of you. And now you're thriving while we're dying. That's justice, I suppose. Clara felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also sadness. Black Hollow had been her home for 32 years. She had memories here, good and bad. Watching it die didn't bring the satisfaction she might have expected. It didn't have to be this way, she said quietly. No, but it is. The mayor nodded respectfully and walked away. On the ride back to the settlement, Gideon asked, How do you feel? Strange, Clara admitted. I spent so many years being angry at that place, wanting to prove them wrong. And now that I have, now that they're acknowledging it, I just feel sad for what could have been. That's because you're a good person. A lesser one would gloat. I don't feel good. I feel tired. Gideon reached over and squeezed her hand. Then rest. We've earned it. The settlement continued to thrive. By 1845, the population had reached 420. They'd expanded into the neighboring valley, established satellite communities, created a network of trade routes that connected a dozen settlements across the territory. Rourke's Crossing had become exactly what Clara had promised it would be, a place where people who didn't fit anywhere else could build a life, where worth was measured by character and contribution, not background or appearance, where community meant something real. Emma had taken over as the settlement's primary leader, supported by a strong council and the systems Clara had built. She was brilliant at it, balancing compassion with practicality in ways that made Clara proud. You did better than I ever could have, Clara told her one afternoon. They were sitting in what everyone still called Clara's cabin, even though Emma had long since moved into it while Clara and Gideon lived in a smaller place at the edge of the settlement. I learned from the best, Emma said. You surpassed the teacher. Maybe, but you laid the groundwork. Everything I've done is built on your foundation. Clara smiled. That's how it should work. Each generation building on what came before, making it better, taking it further. In the spring of 1847, Gideon fell ill. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, then weakness, then pain he couldn't hide no matter how hard he tried. Dr. Morris examined him and delivered the verdict gently but honestly. Your lungs are failing. Too many years breathing cold mountain air, breathing smoke, pushing your body past its limits. I can make you comfortable, but I can't fix this. Gideon took the news with characteristic stoicism. How long? Weeks, maybe a month or two if you rest. Then I'd better make them count. He did. Gideon spent his final weeks visiting with people, sharing stories, making sure Clara knew how much he loved her. He put his affairs in order, said his goodbyes, face death with the same quiet courage he'd faced everything else. Clara sat with him through it all, holding his hand, memorizing his face, refusing to waste a single moment they had left. On a clear morning in early June, Gideon woke up and looked at Clara with perfect clarity. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked. "What?" "That night in the saloon, when I walked past all those beautiful, acceptable women and chose you. That was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life came from that moment." Clara's tears fell freely now. "I love you." "I know. I've always known." Gideon smiled. "You're going to be fine without me. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You'll keep going, keep building, keep making the world better just by being in it." "I don't want to do it without you. I know. But you will anyway, because that's who you are." He died that afternoon, peacefully, his hand in Clara's, looking out the window at the mountains he'd loved his whole life. They buried him on the hillside cemetery, in a spot with a perfect view of the valley. The entire settlement turned out for the funeral. People came from other communities, from Black Hollow, from settlements a week's ride away. Everyone who'd known Gideon Rourke wanted to pay their respects. Clara stood at the graveside and spoke through her grief. "Gideon Rourke was the first person who saw me as worth something, who looked past what I wasn't and saw what I was. He gave me a chance when nobody else would. He stood beside me through everything, the good, the terrible, the impossible. He built this settlement as much as I did, maybe more, because without his choice, without his faith in me, none of this would exist." She looked around at the hundreds of people gathered on the hillside. "He taught me that worth isn't about how you look or where you come from. It's about what you do with what you're given. It's about choosing kindness when cruelty is easier. It's about seeing potential in people everyone else has written off." That's his legacy. That's what he leaves behind. After the funeral, Emma walked Clara back to her cabin. "What will you do now?" Emma asked gently. "Keep going, like he said, because that's who I am." And she did. Clara lived another 7 years after Gideon's death. She worked in her garden, taught the children, served as an advisor to Emma and the council. She wrote letters, sharing knowledge with settlements across the territory. She documented the history of Rourke's Crossing, making sure the stories of those early years weren't forgotten. She aged gracefully, growing smaller and more fragile, but never losing the quiet strength that had carried her through so much. In the winter of 1854, Clara's health began to fail. Dr. Morris, now 70 himself, told her what she already knew. "Your heart's worn out. You've lived hard, survived things that would have killed most people. But the body can only take so much." "How long?" "Not long. I'm sorry." Clara wasn't frightened. She'd lived 59 years, 44 of them since Gideon had changed her life forever. She'd built something that would last long after she was gone. She'd helped hundreds of people. She'd loved and been loved. She had no regrets. On her final day, Emma sat beside her bed in the cabin that had been home for so many years. "The settlement's doing well," Emma reported. 673 residents now. We've just finished negotiations with 3 new trade partners. The school's expanded again. Everything you built is thriving." "Good," Clara whispered. "That's good. You should rest." "I will. Soon." Clara looked at Emma, this brilliant woman who'd been a scared girl when she first arrived at the settlement. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Never forget why we built this place. Not for power or profit or prestige. We built it so people who were broken could heal. So people who were rejected could belong. So everyone could have a chance to be more than the world told them they could be." "I won't forget," Emma promised, tears streaming down her face. "And don't let them make it soft. The frontier's hard, life's hard, people need strength as much as they need compassion. Don't compromise one for the other." "I won't," Clara smiled. "You're going to be magnificent. You already are." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling her under. Around her she could hear the sounds of the settlement, children playing, hammers ringing, voices calling to each other, life continuing, growing, thriving. In her mind she saw Gideon's face that night in the saloon, saw him walking past all those other women and choosing her, saw the moment her whole life changed. She saw the valley as it had been when they first arrived, wild, empty, full of promise. Saw it as it was now, filled with homes and people and hope. She saw the faces of everyone she'd helped over the years, The broken ones who'd found healing, the lost ones who'd found purpose, the rejected ones who'd found belonging. Clara Bellamy Rourke died peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by people who loved her, in the settlement she'd built from nothing but determination and refusal to accept the world's judgment. They buried her beside Gideon on the hillside. Her grave was simple, just her name and dates, the same as everyone else's. She wouldn't have wanted anything more elaborate. The entire settlement shut down for 3 days of mourning. People came from across the territory to pay respects. The territorial governor sent a letter calling Clara one of the most important pioneers in the region's history. Several newspapers ran obituaries celebrating her life and accomplishments. But the real memorial was the settlement itself. Rourke's Crossing continued to grow, eventually becoming one of the most important communities in the mountain territories. The school that Clara had helped establish educated generations of children. The systems she'd created for governance and resource management became models for other settlements. And most importantly, the values she'd fought for: that everyone has worth, that community matters, that compassion is strength, not weakness. Those values endured. 20 years after Clara's death, a young woman arrived at Rourke's Crossing. She was running from an abusive marriage, desperate and scared, with nothing but the clothes on her back. The settlement welcomed her without question, gave her shelter and safety, helped her rebuild her life. 50 years after Clara's death, a mixed-blood family arrived seeking refuge from persecution. They found a community that valued them for their contributions, not their heritage. 100 years after Clara's death, Rourke's Crossing was a thriving town of 3,000 people. It had schools, businesses, a hospital, a proper government, but it still operated on the principles Clara had established: that everyone deserves dignity, that community is built on mutual support, that strength comes from diversity, not uniformity. People still told stories about Clara Bellamy, the woman everyone mocked who became a legend, about Gideon Rourke, the mountain man who saw worth where others saw nothing, about how together they built something that changed the frontier. The stories weren't always accurate. They got embellished over time, details shifting and changing with each telling. But the core truth remained the same: that two people, broken, rejected, dismissed, chose to build something better than the world that had hurt them. That instead of revenge, they chose creation. Instead of bitterness, they chose compassion. Instead of accepting the judgment of others, they defined their own worth. And in doing so, they proved something essential about human nature: that we're not defined by our worst moments or our biggest failures. We're not limited by other people's opinions or our own past mistakes. We're defined by our choices, by what we do when things are hardest, by whether we give up or keep fighting, by whether we let cruelty make us cruel or whether we choose something better. Clara Bellamy chose better. And because she did, hundreds of other people got the chance to choose better too. That was her legacy. Not the settlement or the buildings or the systems, but the simple radical idea that everyone deserves a second chance. That kindness isn't weakness. That the people the world throws away might be exactly the ones who build the future. Long after she was gone, that idea continued to shape lives, to change communities, to prove that the woman everyone mocked had been right all along. Worth isn't given. It's chosen. And sometimes the most unlikely people choose to build something extraordinary.